The golden hues of the morning sun stretched long, jagged shadows across the sprawling parking lot of Brighton Prep, a prestigious private school nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Officer Adam Connor guided his patrol car to a slow stop near the drop-off zone, the engine humming softly as he glanced into the back seat. His son, Evan, fidgeted with unrestrained excitement, his small hands wrapped tightly around a superhero lunchbox adorned with bold red and blue designs. The boy's wide grin revealed a gap where a front tooth once sat, a charming imperfection that made Adam's chest swell with quiet pride. "Have an awesome day, buddy," Adam said warmly, his voice carrying the gentle firmness of a father who wanted nothing but the best for his child. He tilted his head to catch Evan's reflection in the rearview mirror, watching as the boy's bright eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Remember what we talked about, okay? Be kind to everyone, no exceptions." "Yes, Dad," Evan chirped, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. He scrambled out of the car, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement as he joined the swarm of uniformed students streaming toward the school's imposing oak doors. Adam lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on Evan's retreating figure until the boy vanished into the building, swallowed by the hum of youthful chatter and the promise of a new day. Only then did he reach for his phone, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm against the steering wheel as he dialed home. "Hey, honey," he said when his wife, Lily, picked up, her voice a soft anchor in his otherwise restless morning. "Just dropped Evan off. Listen, I might be running late tonight. There's a neighborhood watch meeting I can't skip. You okay with that?" "Be safe out there," Lily replied, her tone laced with a familiar blend of concern and trust. "I'll keep dinner warm for you. Love you." "Love you too," Adam said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "See you tonight." He ended the call and tucked the phone away, his mind already shifting gears as he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the sun-dappled streets surrounding Brighton Prep. 20 minutes later, Adam cruised through the neighborhood, the patrol car's tires whispering against the asphalt. The quiet streets were lined with manicured lawns and elegant homes, a picture of suburban serenity that belied the tension brewing within him. His eyes scanned the sidewalks out of habit, a cop's instinct never fully at rest. That's when he spotted them. Two teenage girls strolling along the pavement, their navy blazers emblazoned with the unmistakable crest of Brighton Prep. Something about them set his nerves on edge. He didn't recognize them, and Adam prided himself on knowing most of the kids at his son's school. His grip tightened on the wheel as he slowed the car, suspicion gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the patrol car's lights, their red and blue pulses slicing through the calm morning air. He pulled up alongside the girls, who stopped in their tracks, turning to face him with expressions so carefully composed they might have been carved from stone. They were identical twins, their dark skin a stark contrast to the crisp white collars of their uniforms. Adam's brow furrowed as he stepped out of the car, his boots thudding against the pavement with deliberate authority. "ID cards," he snapped, his voice sharp and commanding. The twins exchanged a fleeting glance, a silent conversation passing between them before they reached into their backpacks with measured, unhurried movements. One of them spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Sir, we're students here. I'm Maya Johnson, and this is my sister, Nia. We forgot our ID cards today." Adam's eyes narrowed as he studied them, his skepticism a heavy weight in the air. "Forgot them, huh? Or maybe you're lying," he declared, his tone dripping with accusation. To him, they didn't fit the mold of Brighton's usual students. Too dark, too unfamiliar. "You two are coming with me to the station. We'll sort this out there." "Officer, we're just trying to get to class," Nia said, her voice unwavering despite the slight tremble in her hands as she clutched her backpack straps. "Our father can verify who we are." Adam cut her off, stepping closer until he loomed over them, his shadow swallowing the sunlight at their feet. "Listen here," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I know your type, thinking you can just waltz into any place you please. Brighton's a prestigious school, not some free-for-all. You really expect me to believe you belong here? How could people like you even afford it?" His words were a venomous jab, steeped in the ugly assumptions he'd carried for years. The twins didn't flinch. Their faces remained masks of quiet dignity, their silence a wall he couldn't breach. That composure only fueled his irritation, stoking the fire of his misplaced anger. "Get in the car," he ordered, jerking his head toward the patrol vehicle. "Both of you. We're going to have a nice long talk at the station about identity theft and trespassing." Maya and Nia obeyed without a word, their movements graceful yet rigid with unspoken tension as they slid into the back seat. Adam slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the still morning air. He muttered under his breath as he climbed into the driver's seat, something about troublemakers and teaching them a lesson, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. As he started the engine, he caught their reflection in the rearview mirror. The twins sat perfectly still, hands folded in their laps, gazes fixed forward. Their unshakable calm unnerved him. Most kids their age would be sobbing or pleading by now, but these two radiated a quiet strength that made his skin prickle. "You're awful quiet back there," he sneered, pulling away from the curb with a sharp turn of the wheel. "Nothing to say for yourselves?" They didn't respond, only shared another of those knowing glances that set his teeth on edge. He cranked up the radio, letting the static-laced chatter of a morning talk show fill the car, drowning out the oppressive silence. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, the tension coiling tighter with every passing block. The morning traffic parted around them, other drivers easing aside to let the patrol car through, oblivious to the injustice unfolding within its confines. Between the twins on the back seat rested their school bags, stuffed with textbooks and neatly written homework, tangible proof of their legitimacy, evidence Adam had willfully ignored in favor of his own prejudices. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, this time catching sight of a black van trailing behind them. It kept a steady distance, not too close, but unmistakably following. A flicker of unease stirred in his gut, his police instincts kicking in as he straightened in his seat, senses sharpening. Then his phone rang, the shrill sound slicing through the thick air like a blade. He fumbled with it, nearly dropping it when he saw the caller ID. Captain Price. "Speaking," he answered, forcing his voice to steady despite the sweat prickling at his temples. "Connors," the captain barked, his tone razor-sharp and unforgiving. "Where are you right now?" "I'm, bringing in 2 suspicious individuals from Brighton Prep, sir," Adam replied, his words stumbling over each other. 2 teenage girls in Brighton uniforms. The captain's voice hardened, and Adam felt his stomach plummet. "Do you have any idea who those girls are, Connors?" A pause hung heavy on the line, and Adam could hear the captain's deep, deliberate breath. "Those are District Attorney Robert Johnson's daughters, his twins." The world tilted beneath Adam's feet. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold and clammy as his hands began to tremble on the wheel. D.A. Johnson, a titan in the justice system, a man whose influence stretched far beyond the courtroom, a figure who could crush Adam's career with a single word. "Pull over immediately," the captain ordered, his voice a thunderclap. "Release those girls and report directly to D.A. Johnson's office. He's waiting for you." "Yes, sir," Adam croaked, his throat so dry the words barely escaped. "I'm really sorry." The line went dead before he could finish, leaving him alone with the weight of his colossal mistake. His hands shook as he guided the patrol car to the curb, sweat beading on his forehead despite the crisp morning breeze seeping through the cracked window. He took a ragged breath, trying to steady the storm raging in his chest before stepping out of the car. The burden of his actions pressed down on him, a suffocating force that made every step feel like wading through quicksand. He approached the rear door, his boots scuffing against the pavement, and peered inside. The twins sat as they had the entire time, posture impeccable, uniforms pristine, their dark eyes glinting with a quiet wisdom that now seemed almost otherworldly. The clink of his keys betrayed his nerves as he fumbled to unlock the door, the metal trembling in his grasp. I made a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking under the strain. "You're free to go." Maya and Nia exchanged a brief, meaningful glance before stepping out of the car with the same deliberate grace they'd shown all along. Their expressions remained neutral, but their eyes held a depth that pierced through Adam's crumbling facade. He shifted uncomfortably, his weight rocking from one foot to the other, acutely aware of the black van that had pulled up behind them. Its tinted windows gleamed ominously in the sunlight, a silent witness to his unraveling. As the twins stood before him, unharmed yet undeniably wronged, Adam's bravado evaporated. He saw not just two girls, but the daughters of a man who embodied justice, a man who would soon decide his fate. The lesson was brutal and clear. Power, when wielded carelessly, could boomerang with devastating force. The twins' silence spoke louder than any reprimand, a testament to their strength and a mirror to his failure. For the first time, Adam felt the sting of true accountability, and it burned deeper than he'd ever imagined. Adam's apology spilled out in a rush, his words tumbling over one another like stones skittering down a steep hill. "Look, I'm really sorry about all this," he said, his voice tight and mechanical, as if he were reading from a script he hadn't rehearsed well enough. His hand darted up to rake through his dark, messy hair, a nervous tic he'd carried since he was a kid, one he'd tried and failed to shake. The morning air felt thick around him, heavy with the weight of his own regret. "It was just a mix-up, you know? These things happen sometimes. Honest mistakes." His explanation faltered, fading into the stillness as the twins stood before him, their silence louder than any words could have been. Their steady, unblinking gazes pierced through him, unraveling his composure thread by thread. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the sidewalk beneath him suddenly too hard, too real. Desperate to fill the growing void, Adam kept talking, his voice rising slightly with every syllable. "I mean, if I'd had any idea who you were, or who your father was, I wouldn't have—" The sentence choked off midstream as the realization of his own words hit him like a slap. He hadn't meant it that way, but there it was, hanging in the air between them. An admission of bias so blatant it made his stomach twist. The twins' expressions remained carved in stone, but a flicker in their dark eyes, something sharp and knowing, made Adam feel as though he were shrinking, his 6-foot frame collapsing inward until he was nothing more than a child caught in a lie. They didn't need to say a thing. Their quiet dignity in the face of his prejudice was a rebuke more cutting than any shouted accusation. It was a lesson in justice he hadn't signed up for, one that left him exposed and raw. The sharp sound of a car door swinging open behind them jolted Adam from his spiraling thoughts. He flinched, his nerves already frayed, and turned to see a figure approaching. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a black suit so crisp it seemed to defy the morning humidity. The man's footsteps echoed with purpose, each one a deliberate thud against the pavement, as if the ground itself bent to his will. His presence filled the space, commanding attention without effort. "Ladies," he said, dipping his head toward the twins, his voice a low rumble, steady and professional. "Your father is expecting you." The twins moved as one, their steps graceful and perfectly in sync, gliding toward the sleek black van parked at the curb. Adam watched them go, their departure a silent symphony of poise that left him feeling clumsy and small. The man turned to him then, his gaze locking onto Adam with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Officer Connors," he said, his tone calm but edged with an authority that brooked no argument. "I'm Marcus Price, head of security for D.A. Johnson." He paused, letting the title settle like a stone in Adam's gut. "I want you to understand that the DA will be fully informed about what happened here today. Every single detail. There was no menace in his words, no raised voice or pointed finger, just a quiet, unshakable certainty that made Adam's throat close up. His collar tightened around his neck, a noose of his own making, and his knees wobbled as though they might give out entirely. Marcus didn't linger to watch him squirm. With a final piercing look, he turned and strode back to the van, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete, a sound that lingered in Adam's ears long after the vehicle pulled away. Left alone on the empty sidewalk, Adam stood frozen, the morning sun beating down on him like a spotlight trained on a guilty man. Its brightness felt invasive, stripping away any shadow he might have hidden in, laying bare his shame for anyone passing by to see. His radio crackled at his hip, the usual chatter of police codes and check-ins buzzing faintly, but it was drowned out by the hammering of his own heart. He couldn't shake the image of the twins' eyes or the steady, unflinching presence of Marcus Price. The encounter had been brief, but it had carved itself into him. A lesson in accountability he couldn't unlearn. The next day, Adam found himself perched on the edge of a hard plastic chair outside D.A. Johnson's office, his leg bouncing uncontrollably. The precinct hummed around him, phones ringing, officers barking orders, the clatter of keyboards. But it all felt distant, muffled by the dread pooling in his chest. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying the previous day in an endless loop of what-ifs and should-haves. When the secretary's voice cut through the haze, "Officer Connors, they're ready for you." His legs turned to lead. He stood slowly, each step toward the heavy wooden doors a march toward judgment. Inside, D.A. Johnson sat behind his desk, a man whose calm demeanor somehow amplified his authority. The room seemed to bend around him, every inch of it saturated with the weight of his presence. Captain Price stood off to the side, arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Take a seat, Officer Connors," D.A. Johnson said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Adam sank into it, his throat so dry he could barely swallow. "Sir, about yesterday," he began, but the D.A. raised a hand, cutting him off with a single measured gesture. "Let me be perfectly clear," D.A. Johnson said, his voice steady and deliberate, each word landing like a hammer on an anvil. "What happened yesterday wasn't a simple misunderstanding. You detained 2 young women without any justifiable cause, based entirely on how they looked. That they happened to be my daughters only brought this to my attention sooner rather than later." Adam stared down at his hands, clenched tightly in his lap, the heat of shame creeping up his neck and searing his cheeks. The DA's restraint made it worse. There was no yelling, no explosion of anger, just a quiet dismantling of Adam's excuses that left him nowhere to hide. "But," D.A. Johnson continued, leaning back slightly in his chair, "I believe in second chances. I believe in justice that transforms rather than destroys. Captain Price and I have talked this over at length." Adam flicked his eyes toward his captain, who gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable. "Instead of firing you, we're transferring you to the 9th Precinct in Oakwood District. It's a predominantly black community, and for the next 6 months, you'll work directly with the people you've shown prejudice against." Adam's head jerked up, disbelief flashing across his face. "Oakwood? But that's 3 hours away." "This isn't up for debate, Officer Connors," Captain Price interjected, his voice a low growl. "It's this, or you turn in your badge." Adam slumped back in the chair, his mind racing. Lily's face floated into his thoughts, her warm smile, the way she hummed while cooking dinner, and Evan, his little boy, with his gap-toothed grin and endless questions. "My family," he murmured, barely audible. The Johnson's tone softened, just a fraction. "Sometimes we need to step away from the ones we love to become better for them in the long run." The words hung there, heavy with truth, and Adam felt them settle into his bones. That evening, he stood in the doorway of Evan's bedroom, watching as Lily tucked their son in. The soft glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the room, illuminating Evan's small form under the blankets. Lily's voice was a soothing murmur as she read the last lines of his bedtime story, her hand brushing his hair back with a tenderness that made Adam's chest ache. His packed bags waited by the front door, a silent countdown to his departure. When the story ended, he stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed to press a kiss to Evan's forehead. He lingered there, breathing in the faint scent of shampoo and innocence, trying to etch this moment into his memory. In the living room, Lily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she faced him. "You don't have to do this alone, Adam. We could come with you, Evan and me." Her voice trembled, and it nearly broke him. He shook his head, pulling her into his arms, her warmth a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. "No, Lil. Evan's settled in school here. You've got your job, your friends. I can't drag you both across the state because I screwed up." He kissed her gently, his lips lingering on hers.
"It's just 6 months. I'll be back before you know it, I promise." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "You'll call every day?" "Twice a day," he said, forcing a small, shaky smile. "I love you both so much. That's why I have to make this right."
Lily walked him to the car, her hands trembling as she handed him the last of his bags. As he pulled out of the driveway, he glanced in the rearview mirror, watching her silhouette shrink against the backdrop of their little house, Evan's window glowing faintly in the dusk. The road ahead stretched out dark and uncertain, but he clung to the hope that these 6 months might reshape him into the man his family deserved, a man who understood the cost of power and the necessity of justice. When Adam arrived at the 9th Precinct in Oakwood District, his stomach churned with a mix of nerves and exhaustion. The building loomed before him, its weathered brick walls and faded signage a stark contrast to the polished precinct he'd left behind. The 3-hour drive had given him too much time to think, too much space for doubt to creep in. As he stepped through the front doors, the familiar chaos of a police station greeted him. Officers shouting across the room, the shrill ring of phones, the shuffle of boots on linoleum. But something was different here. Eyes turned toward him, lingering longer than they should have, sizing him up with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. At the front desk, a grizzled sergeant looked up from a stack of paperwork, his expression unreadable. "Officer Connors, they're expecting you in the captain's office." Adam nodded, his throat tight, and made his way through the bullpen. Whispers trailed him like shadows. "That's the one from the Johnson case," someone muttered under their breath. And he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, shoulders squared against the weight of their stares. The captain's office door stood ajar, and inside, Captain Martinez sat behind her desk, her posture rigid but her tone coolly professional. "Officer Connors, welcome to the 9th. Beside her stood a tall black officer, his graying temples lending him an air of seasoned authority. His presence was magnetic, his eyes sharp and assessing as they settled on Adam. "This is Officer Thomas King," Captain Martinez continued. "He'll be your partner and mentor while you're here." King didn't extend a hand in greeting. Instead, he studied Adam with a gaze that felt like it could peel back every layer of pretense. "We'll be working community patrol together," King said, his deep voice resonating with a quiet power earned over decades on the job. Later that morning, as they walked through the neighborhood, Adam couldn't help but notice how the community embraced Officer King. Shopkeepers waved from their doorways, their smiles genuine and warm. Kids darted across the street, shouting his name with unrestrained delight, while elderly residents paused to exchange a few words, their faces lighting up at the sight of him. King moved through it all with an easy grace, his broad frame a pillar of stability in the bustling streets. But for Adam, the reception was markedly different. Those same shopkeepers barely glanced his way, their eyes sliding past him as if he were invisible. The kids fell silent when he approached, and the elderly turned their backs, their distrust palpable. At a small coffee shop on the corner, the owner handed King his usual order, a black coffee with a nod and a grin. But when Adam stepped up to the counter, the man's face hardened, his acknowledgement limited to a curt grunt. Outside, a group of teenagers lounged against a brick wall, their laughter cutting off abruptly as Adam passed by. One of them, a lanky kid with a faded hoodie, muttered something under his breath, and the others snickered. Adam's jaw tightened, but King shot him a look, steady, unreadable, that kept him moving forward. The lesson was clear. Trust here wasn't given, it was earned. And for Adam, that road would be long and steep, paved with the consequences of his own actions and the hard-earned wisdom of those who'd walked it before him. Justice, he was beginning to understand, wasn't just a word. It was a reckoning. The morning sun blazed relentlessly down on Adam Connors as he trudged along his assigned beat, each step echoing with the weight of a badge that seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temples, but it wasn't just the heat that pressed against him. It was the unspoken judgment radiating from every corner of this tight-knit neighborhood. Storefront windows, glinting in the light, reflected more than just the bustling street. They held eyes, watchful and wary, tracking his every move. As he approached the intersection of Malcolm X Boulevard, the chatter of daily life faded into an eerie stillness. The street, lined with a patchwork of modest homes and small businesses, might have felt like a warm embrace to someone else, someone who belonged. But for Adam, it was a gauntlet of rejection. Mrs. Foster's bakery, a cornerstone of the community, stood just ahead. Normally, the air around it carried the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, mingling with the sound of laughter and neighborly gossip. Today, as Adam drew near, the scent was there, but the warmth was not. Through the smudged glass of the shop's window, he caught a glimpse of the elderly owner, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her hands flour-dusted from kneading dough. She froze when she saw him, her wrinkled face tightening with something between fear and disdain. Without a word, she turned sharply, her apron swaying as she ushered a handful of customers toward the back. The open sign flickered faintly in the window, its glow a hollow promise. Adam's chest tightened. He wasn't just an outsider here. He was a pariah. Further down the block, two fellow officers from the precinct appeared, their navy uniforms crisp against the weathered pavement. Officer Williams, a tall black man with a quick smile, had greeted Adam with a nod during the morning briefing, his eyes crinkling with a hint of camaraderie. Now, as their paths converged, Williams' expression shifted. His jaw clenched, his gaze slid past Adam as if he were a ghost. The other officer, a wiry rookie with nervous energy, followed suit. Without breaking stride, they veered across the street, their boots scuffing the asphalt in a deliberate arc to avoid sharing the sidewalk with him. The patrol car they climbed into roared to life moments later, tires squealing faintly as they peeled away, leaving Adam standing alone amid the whispers that seemed to cling to the air like smoke. Officer King's voice cut through the memory of that moment as they continued their patrol earlier that morning. "They'd rather cross the street than pass you on the sidewalk," he'd said, his tone steady but edged with warning. "They know who you are, Connors." The words had landed like a punch, and Adam felt them again now, reverberating through him as he walked. King, a veteran of 20 years with salt and pepper hair and a gaze that could pierce steel, had seen it all in this neighborhood. His broad shoulders carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd earned his place here, block by block, handshake by handshake. "Word travels fast in a community like this," he'd added, his deep voice rumbling as they turned a corner. "Every step you take, every word you say, it's all being watched, weighed, remembered." They'd stopped then, beneath the shade of a sagging awning, and King had pivoted to face Adam head-on. The older officer's eyes, dark and unyielding, locked onto his. "Let me make one thing crystal clear, Connors," he said, his voice dropping to a near growl. "I've poured 2 decades into building trust here, 2 decades of showing up, listening, proving I'm not just a uniform. I won't let 6 months of your reckless judgment tear that down." Adam's throat tightened as King leaned closer, the faint scent of coffee on his breath mingling with the tension between them. "The captain might have saddled me with mentoring you, but don't kid yourself. I'm watching you just as closely as they are. One slip, one whiff of the arrogance that landed you in this mess, and I'll see to it you never pin that badge on again. Do you understand me? Understand?" Adam's mouth went dry. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Yes, sir. Crystal clear." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the storm of shame and defiance churning inside him. King held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded curtly. "Good, let's keep moving." Now, hours later, Adam pushed open the door to the local diner, a greasy spoon where officers often grabbed a quick bite. The bell above jingled cheerfully, but the sound felt mocking as the room fell silent. The usual hum of conversation, waitresses calling out orders, forks clinking against plates, the low murmur of gossip, died the instant he stepped inside. Several patrons, including 2 officers from his precinct, froze mid-bite. Their eyes flicked to him, then away, as they hurriedly gathered their jackets and abandoned half-eaten meals. A plate of fries sat cooling on the table, steam still rising faintly from a burger left untouched. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a stained apron, took one look at Adam and vanished into the kitchen without a word. He stood there, rooted to the spot, the bell's fading chime echoing in the emptiness. After a long, humiliating moment, he backed out, letting the door swing shut with a soft thud. His stomach growled in protest, but he ignored it, turning back toward his patrol car. Everywhere he went, the pattern repeated. Store owners, caught mid-conversation with customers, suddenly busied themselves adjusting displays of canned goods or rearranging fruit baskets as he passed. A street vendor, his cart piled high with newspapers and glistening apples, turned his back so abruptly that a few papers fluttered to the ground. Parents on the sidewalk tightened their grips on their children's hands, pulling them closer with murmured warnings. Even the kids, usually fearless and curious, shrank away, their wide eyes following him from a safe distance. Adam's uniform, once a source of pride, now felt like a wall, separating him from the very people he'd sworn to protect. Each step drove the truth deeper. He wasn't just the new guy on the beat. He was the officer who'd racially profiled and wrongfully detained the district attorney's teenage kids, a mistake that had rippled through the neighborhood like a stone-shattering glass. And no one, not a single soul, was going to let him forget it. Later that day, Adam found Officer King in the precinct break room, slumped in a folding metal chair that creaked under his weight. The older man was flipping through a stack of paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration, but he looked up as Adam shuffled in. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor. Adam's shoulders sagged, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke. "They all hate me, sir. Every single person out there." King set his papers down deliberately, his movements slow and measured. He studied Adam's face, pale, drawn, etched with a mix of exhaustion and despair. "Hate's a strong word, Connors," he said finally, his tone softer but still firm. "They don't trust you. That's different." He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "Trust isn't a given. It's a currency, and right now you're flat broke." Adam sank into the chair across from him, the metal cold against his back. "What's the point?" he muttered, dragging a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "No matter what I do, they're always going to see me as the cop who screwed up with the DA's kids." King leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You're right about one thing. They won't forget that anytime soon. But they'll also remember what you do next. Trust isn't something you can demand with a badge or force with an apology. You've got to earn it, one day, one choice at a time." His eyes narrowed, searching Adam's face for a flicker of resolve. "The question is, are you willing to put in the work?" Adam's fingers tapped nervously against the tabletop, his mind racing. "They won't even look at me," he said, his voice cracking with frustration. "How am I supposed to start?" "Small," King replied, his tone practical but laced with a quiet urgency. "Learn their names. Say good morning, even if they don't say it back. Show up at the community picnic, not as a cop on duty, but as a guy who gives a damn. Try the senior center on 4th Street. Those folks have lived through everything this neighborhood's thrown at them. Fires, floods, worse cops than you. They've got long memories, but they're usually open to second chances." Adam frowned, skepticism tugging at his features. "The senior center?" King nodded, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "They've got bingo night every Wednesday, always short on volunteers. And Miss Foster, you know, the bakery lady, she runs it. Makes a sweet potato pie so good it'll make you forget your own name." He paused, letting the idea settle. "Or there's the youth center. Coach Martinez runs basketball for the kids after school. Imagine you, not just patrolling the block, but in there teaching them how to sink a free throw. That's the kind of thing that shifts how people see you." "What if they don't want me there?" Adam asked, his voice low, almost defeated. "Then you keep showing up," King shot back, his tone unwavering. You prove you're not there to flash your badge or write tickets. You're there to listen, to help. Stop by the bodegas not to check their permits, but to ask Mr. Rivera about his grandkids or hear Mrs. Chen's story about opening her shop. Let them tell you who they are, and maybe they'll start to care who you are. Adam's fingers stilled, his gaze dropping to the table as King's words sank in. There's also the neighborhood cleanup crew, King went on, his voice warming slightly. Every Saturday morning they're out there picking up trash, planting flowers, patching up old porches. Nothing builds bridges like sweating alongside someone, getting dirt under your nails for something bigger than yourself. Adam exhaled heavily, the weight of it all pressing down on him. These people crossed the street to avoid me today, he said, almost to himself. Then tomorrow, King replied, his voice steady as bedrock. You give them a reason to stay on your side. Look, Connors, nobody's expecting you to rewrite your story overnight, but they're watching, always watching, to see if you're willing to try, to learn, to change. Are you? The break room fell silent, the hum of the lights filling the void. Adam stared at the scratched surface of the table, King's challenge hanging between them like a lifeline he wasn't sure he could grab. I don't know if I can do all that, he admitted finally, his voice raw. Nobody's asking you to do it all at once, King said, leaning back with a faint nod. Pick one thing, start there. Join the neighborhood watch, not to bark orders, but to sit and hear what keeps them up at night. Or hit the food bank on Wilson Street. Stack some shelves, hand out a few bags. Actions shout louder than words, and right now, yours need to tell a different story. Before Adam could respond, his radio crackled to life, shattering the moment. All units, house fire on Maple Street. Smoke visible, fire trucks en route. Adam grabbed his gear, adrenaline spiking as he bolted for the door, King's words still echoing in his mind. When he arrived, thick black smoke poured from the second-floor windows of an old Victorian house, its faded paint peeling under the heat. Flames licked at the eaves, casting an orange glow against the graying sky. But it wasn't just the fire that stopped Adam in his tracks. It was the scene unfolding below. At least 20 residents had formed a bucket brigade, a chaotic but determined line of neighbors passing sloshing containers of water from hand to hand. Among them was Mrs. Foster, her apron swapped for a soot-streaked sweater, her frail arms trembling as she heaved a bucket forward. Officer Williams was there too, his uniform damp with sweat, barking encouragement to a teenage boy struggling with a heavy pail. Even Coach Martinez, his whistle dangling around his neck, hauled water alongside a cluster of kids from the youth center, their faces streaked with grime but lit with purpose. Adam hesitated, his boots rooted to the pavement. The heat stung his face, the smoke burned his lungs, but it was the sight of this community, people who'd turned their backs on him hours ago, working together that hit hardest. Justice, he realized, wasn't just in the badge he wore or the laws he enforced. It was here, in the consequences of power wielded wrongly, and in the slow, unglamorous work of making it right. For the first time that day, he stepped forward, not as the cop they feared, but as a man who might still belong. The night was alive with chaos, the air thick with the acrid sting of smoke as flames devoured the old wooden house on the corner. Neighbors darted from one yard to the next, clutching garden hoses in their hands, spraying desperate arcs of water toward the blaze. The flickering orange glow painted their faces in shades of fear and determination, each of them doing whatever they could to hold back the inferno's relentless hunger. Amid the shouting and the crackle of burning timber, a woman's piercing scream sliced through the pandemonium, her voice raw with panic. "Someone's still inside! Miss Foster, she's upstairs!" Her words hung in the air, heavy with urgency as heads turned toward the engulfed building. Without a second's pause, 3 young men sprang into action, their movements swift and purposeful, as if they'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in their minds. Adam, a rookie cop stationed nearby, stood rooted to the spot, his breath catching in his chest as he watched them work. One of the men, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed, smashed a downstairs window with a brick he'd pried from the garden path, glass shattering inward like brittle ice. Another bolted toward a garage across the street, emerging moments later with a rickety aluminum ladder slung over his shoulder, its rungs clattering with every step. "Here!" Adam called out, shaking off his awe and jogging over to steady the ladder against the house's charred exterior. The men barely glanced his way, their focus honed like a blade on the task ahead. Two of them scaled the ladder with the agility of cats, disappearing into the swirling black smoke, while the third planted himself at the base, hands braced on the metal, ready to catch whatever, or whoever, came down. Time stretched thin, each minute dragging like an eternity. Adam's heart thudded in his ears as the smoke thickened, curling into the night sky in choking plumes. The distant wail of fire truck sirens grew louder, a promise of relief that felt too far off. He wiped sweat from his brow, his uniform sticking to his skin, and strained his eyes toward the window. Then, like a vision through the haze, the two men reappeared, their silhouettes framed against the glowing inferno. Between them sagged an elderly woman, her frail form draped in a soot-streaked nightgown, her silver hair wild and matted. Miss Foster. The crowd below erupted into a roar of cheers and gasps, hands reaching up as the men guided her down the ladder with painstaking care. Adam leapt forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, and gripped her arm as she stumbled onto solid ground. She coughed violently, her thin frame trembling, but her eyes flickered with life, grateful, bewildered, alive. A neighbor, a middle-aged woman with tired lines etched into her face, rushed over, wrapping a thick wool blanket around Miss Foster's shoulders, murmuring soft reassurances. Another man, his flannel shirt damp with sweat, pressed a bottle of water into her shaking hands. As the fire trucks screeched to a halt, their red lights pulsing through the darkness, Adam stepped back, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. He watched the scene unfold like a living tapestry. People clustering around Miss Foster, their voices overlapping with offers of shelter and comfort. Kids darting between houses, lugging jugs of water and spare blankets. An older man with a limp barking orders to keep the crowd clear for the firefighters. One of the rescuers, a lanky guy with soot smudged across his cheek, caught Adam's eye and gave him a curt nod. "Thanks for the help, officer," he said, his tone clipped but sincere, before turning back to the group. It was a small gesture, barely a ripple, but to Adam, it felt like the first stone falling from a wall he hadn't even known he'd built. The firefighters took over, their heavy hoses blasting streams of water that hissed against the dying flames. But the crowd didn't scatter. They lingered, forming knots of conversation, plotting next steps. A woman with a clipboard was already scribbling notes about fundraising, her brow furrowed with determination. Another neighbor, a burly man with a graying beard, offered Miss Foster his guest room, his voice gruff but warm. Adam stood at the edge of it all, his patrol instincts fading as something deeper took root. These weren't just people he was paid to watch over. They were a family, bound not by blood, but by an unspoken pact to protect their own. A little girl, no older than 6, tugged at Miss Foster's blanket, pressing a tattered stuffed rabbit into her hands. "It'll keep you safe," she whispered, her wide eyes shining with conviction. Adam felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't the neighborhood he'd been warned about in the precinct briefings, a place of petty crime and simmering distrust. These were people who moved as one, who saw suffering and refused to look away. The next morning, Adam cruised past the wreckage of Miss Foster's house, the smell of charred wood still hanging heavy in the air. His patrol car hummed along the quiet street, and he slowed as he spotted a cluster of people on the sidewalk. His hand twitched toward his radio, years of training bracing him for trouble. But as he pulled closer, the tension in his shoulders eased. Folding tables lined the curb, heaped with piles of clothes, blankets, and mismatched dishes. A woman with a no-nonsense ponytail sorted everything into neat stacks, barking gentle instructions to a pair of kids hauling a box of toys. "Careful with those. Pick out the good ones," she called, her voice firm but kind. Neighbors streamed in and out, some lugging grocery bags stuffed with canned goods, others maneuvering pickup trucks loaded with furniture, a chipped dresser, a wobbly coffee table, a microwave that gleamed despite a few dents. Adam parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots as he took it in. "Everything they owned is gone," he overheard a woman say, her hands buried in a box of pots and pans. "Insurance won't cover half of it. Cheap policy, you know how it goes. But we'll get them sorted." Nearby, a teenage boy wrestled with a heavy oak desk, his skinny arms straining under the weight. Adam moved without thinking. "Need a hand?" he asked, stepping forward. The kid froze, sizing him up with wary eyes, then gave a reluctant nod. Together they hefted the desk to a growing pile of furniture, and Adam spotted a sign taped to a table. "Foster Family Relief Fund. Every dollar helps." A mason jar beside it brimmed with crumpled bills and loose change, next to a notebook crammed with names, numbers, and promises. Rooms to stay in, meals to cook, rides to offer. "She's with us now," an older woman said, her pen scratching another entry into the ledger. She wore a faded cardigan, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen hard times before. "My daughter's off at college, so we've got space. She can stay as long as she needs." Adam lingered, his gaze drifting over the scene. He thought of his own street back home, neat lawns, locked doors, polite nods that never went deeper. Would they rally like this? Share their last loaf of bread with a stranger? A gaggle of kids raced by, giggling as they hauled bags of clothes, their parents trailing with heavier loads, shouting thanks to the organizers. "Officer Connors!" a voice called, and Adam turned to see the lanky rescuer from the night before, waving him over. "If you've got a minute, we could use some muscle with this stuff." Adam didn't hesitate. He shrugged off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and spent the next hour hauling chairs, stacking boxes, and listening. They told him about Miss Foster, how she'd slip cookies to the neighborhood kids on their way home from school, how she'd sit at her creaky upright piano and teach free lessons to anyone who asked, her gnarled hands coaxing melodies from the keys. "She never turned anyone away," a woman said, folding a sweater with care, "even when she barely had enough for herself." Adam felt the ground shift beneath him. These people. He'd sized them up through a lens of reports and rumors, expecting trouble where there was none. Now, he saw their strength, woven into every shared blanket, every dollar dropped into that jar. They weren't waiting for some higher power to fix things. They were the power, raw and real. Later, after his shift, Adam stopped at Martin's grocery on Cedar Street. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the scuffed linoleum. He wandered the aisles, basket dangling from his hand, his mind replaying the day in vivid flashes, the fire, the ladder, the jar of cash. At the checkout, he stood behind an elderly woman, her frail fingers trembling as she fished coins from a frayed leather purse. The cashier, a kid with braces and a patient smile, waited without a hint of rush. "That's $4.32, Miss Wilson," he said, his voice soft as a breeze. She recounted her change, her shoulders slumping as the total fell short. "Oh dear," she murmured, her whisper fragile with shame. Adam's hand moved to his pocket, the lesson of the day burning bright in his chest. Justice wasn't just in the law he enforced. It was in the mercy they all owed each other. In the fluorescent glow of the grocery store, Miss Wilson's cheeks burned a deep crimson, her shame palpable as she stood before the cashier, fumbling through her worn purse. Her trembling fingers brushed against crumpled receipts and loose coins, but she knew the truth before the cashier even opened her mouth. She didn't have enough. Her heart sank, a quiet heaviness settling in her chest, the kind that comes from a lifetime of scraping by and still falling short. She avoided the cashier's eyes, her pride stinging as sharply as a fresh cut, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. Before the cashier, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Jenny, could muster a response. A shadow loomed behind Adam, who stood next in line clutching his own modest haul of groceries. A tall man stepped forward, his presence commanding yet unassuming. His work clothes hung loose on his broad frame, streaked with the evidence of a hard day's labor. Paint splattered across his faded flannel shirt, plaster dust clinging to the cuffs of his jeans. His boots, caked with the gritty residue of a construction site, left faint traces of dirt on the polished floor as he shifted his weight. His face, weathered and lined like an old map, carried the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned every crease through years of toil under the sun. There was a depth in his hazel eyes, a wisdom that didn't boast, but simply existed, forged by decades of honest sweat. "How much is she short?" he asked, his voice low and steady, already reaching for the battered leather wallet tucked in his back pocket. The leather was frayed at the edges, softened by years of use, a testament to a man who didn't waste money on appearances. Jenny glanced between them, her fingers hovering over the register. "About $12, she replied, her tone softening as she took in the scene unfolding before her. "I'll cover it," the man said without a flicker of hesitation, pulling a crisp $20 bill from his wallet and sliding it across the counter. His hands were rough, calloused from gripping tools, but his gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "My mama raised me to lend a hand whenever I could. She'd tan my hide if she caught me standing by while someone needed help." A faint smile tugged at his lips, a flicker of memory lighting his expression as he spoke of his mother, a woman who'd clearly left an indelible mark on his soul. Miss Wilson's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her wrinkled face crumpling under the weight of her emotions. Her lips parted, a protest forming, "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." But her voice faltered, fragile and thin. She clasped her hands together, the skin papery and spotted with age, as if she could physically hold back the flood of gratitude threatening to spill over. "Please," the man insisted, his tone soft but firm. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and warm, like a lifeline in a storm. "It'd make my mama proud to know I helped someone today. That's worth more than any $20. His words carried a sincerity that cut through the hum of the store, the distant beep of scanners, the rustle of bags, the low murmur of other shoppers. Miss Wilson's resistance melted like ice under the sun. She reached up with a trembling hand, her fingers brushing his cheek in a gesture so tender it seemed to belong to another time. Her touch was maternal, a silent thank you steeped in decades of nurturing others. "God bless you, young man. God bless you," she whispered, her voice quivering with raw, unfiltered emotion. Tears slipped down her cheeks now, tracing the deep lines etched by years of struggle and resilience. The man didn't flinch under her gratitude. Instead, he turned to her groceries, cans of soup, a loaf of bread, a small carton of milk, and began bagging them with care. His large hands moved deliberately, arranging each item so nothing would bruise or spill, as if this small act of kindness was as sacred as the payment itself. Another customer, a middle-aged woman in faded blue scrubs, stepped up beside them. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping from a long shift at the hospital, and her eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much. "I'll carry these to your car," she offered, her voice gentle but resolute, already lifting the bags before Miss Wilson could object. Adam stood rooted to the spot, his own groceries, a pack of chicken, some vegetables, a box of cereal, forgotten on the conveyor belt. He watched, transfixed, as this quiet symphony of compassion played out before him. It was simple, unscripted, yet it unfolded with the grace of a flower opening to the morning light, a fleeting beauty born from human connection. The weight of his own day, the endless grind of his job, seemed to lift for a moment as he absorbed the scene. When it was his turn to pay, he moved through the motions mechanically, his mind still tethered to what he'd witnessed. Stepping out into the parking lot, the evening air greeted him with a cool embrace, laced with the earthy scent of freshly mown grass and the smoky hint of barbecues drifting from nearby homes. The sky had deepened into a rich purple, the last threads of daylight surrendering to dusk. Streetlights flickered to life, their warm yellow glow pooling on the asphalt and stretching long shadows behind him. He gripped his plastic bags, the handles digging into his palms, and let his thoughts wander. That man hadn't paused to weigh the cost or inconvenience of helping Miss Wilson. There'd been no calculation, no expectation of reward or praise, just an instinctive leap to bridge the gap between need and relief. It struck Adam like a chord, resonating with memories of the donation drive he'd seen earlier that day. Neighbors had poured in with clothes, food, blankets, no questions asked, no conditions attached. Their generosity flowed as effortlessly as a river carving its path, a natural rhythm of care woven into the fabric of this community. It wasn't extraordinary to them. It was simply who they were, as innate as the sunset bleeding color across the horizon above. But as Adam approached his car in the dimly lit corner of the lot, that warmth drained from his chest, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. His steps slowed, then stopped entirely. Scrawled across the hood and doors of his sedan in jagged, dripping red spray paint were the words, "Watch yourself, cop." The letters glowed under the streetlights, bold and unmissable, a stark wound against the car's dark paint. He set his bags down on the cracked asphalt, his hands curling into tight fists until his knuckles whitened. The paint was still wet, tiny rivulets streaking down the metal like blood from a fresh cut. The sharp chemical stench of aerosol stung his nose as he circled the vehicle, each step revealing more of the damage. His pulse thrummed in his ears, a mix of fury and disbelief churning in his gut. His phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him from his spiraling thoughts. He fished it out, glancing at the screen. Officer King. "Hey, partner, you still at Martin's?" Her voice crackled through, steady but edged with concern. "Yeah," Adam replied, his throat tight, words clipped with barely contained anger. "Someone vandalized my car. Probably those kids we saw earlier today watching us. I'm gonna—" "Hold up," King interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut through his rising temper. "I'm 5 minutes out. Don't do anything till I get there." True to her word, her patrol car rolled into the lot moments later, tires crunching over loose gravel. She stepped out, her movements calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Adam's chest. The store's fluorescent lights cast long shadows across her face as she approached, her dark eyes narrowing as she studied the graffiti. She circled the car once, her boots tapping a slow rhythm on the pavement, then turned to him. "This isn't revenge, Adam," she said finally, her voice measured but heavy with meaning. "It's a warning." He scoffed, gesturing at the defaced car with a jerky sweep of his arm. "A warning? Look at this, King. This is straight-up vandalism." "These people," she cut in, her tone firm but not harsh, "have seen officers like you come and go. Cops who didn't bother to understand them, who treated them like problems to be solved instead of human beings." She stepped closer, her gaze locking with his, unflinching. "This isn't about your car, Adam. It's about what you represent to them." He dragged a hand through his hair, frustration radiating from every tense muscle. "So what am I supposed to do, just let it slide?" "No," King replied, her voice softening but still resolute. "You're supposed to think about it. Really think about why someone felt this was their only way to scream. Remember how you handled those teens last week? That's still fresh in people's minds. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences show up as red paint on your hood." Her words landed like a punch, stripping away the heat of his anger and leaving a raw, uncomfortable truth in its wake. He stared at the graffiti again, the jagged letters shifting in his mind. Not just mindless destruction, but a cry born from years of mistrust, a wound festering beneath the surface of this tight-knit community. Justice, he realized, wasn't always clean or simple. It was messy, layered, a mirror reflecting both the good and the ugly. "I'll help you file the report," King offered, pulling a notebook from her pocket, her pen already poised. "But take this for what it is, Adam, a wake-up call." After scribbling down the details and covering the worst of the paint with crumpled newspapers from his trunk, Adam climbed into his car and drove back to his temporary apartment. The small one-bedroom felt like a hollow shell, cold, sterile, a far cry from the warm house he'd left behind with Lily and Evan. He kicked off his shoes, the thud echoing in the silence, and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change. Lying there in the dark, the day replayed in his mind like a film reel. The house fire that morning, the community rallying with donations, the grocery store kindness, and now this stark warning etched in paint. The contrast gnawed at him, How could a place so rich in compassion also harbor such bitterness? King's words echoed again. Actions and consequences. He thought of the power he wielded as an officer. How a single choice could ripple outward, building trust or shattering it. The vandalism wasn't just an attack. It was a lesson. A reminder that authority unchecked could breed resentment as easily as kindness could foster hope. Reaching for his phone, he dialed home, the familiar ring a lifeline in the gloom. When Lily's voice answered, warm and soft. "Hey, honey. I was just thinking about you." His throat tightened, emotions swelling behind his eyes. "I miss you both so much," he managed, hearing Evan's laughter in the background, a sound that twisted his heart with longing. "Is that our little man I hear?" he asked, forcing a smile into his voice. "He's playing with his new superhero toys," Lily said, her tone brightening. "Evan, want to say hi to Daddy?" There was a rustle, then Evan's voice burst through, brimming with excitement. "Dad, I got an A on my science project." "That's amazing, buddy," Adam replied, his enthusiasm genuine despite the ache in his chest. "I'm so proud of you." After a few minutes of Evan's chatter, stories of school, friends, and his triumphant volcano experiment, Lily returned, closing a door to muffle the noise. "How are you really doing?" she asked, her voice dropping to a tender whisper. Adam sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's complicated," he admitted, the weight of the day spilling into his words. "I saw something beautiful today. People helping each other like it was nothing. But then I saw the other side, too. I'm starting to understand what King meant about consequences. Power's a tricky thing, Lily. Use it wrong, and it comes back to haunt you." As he spoke, the lesson crystallized. Justice wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about building something lasting, something human. And the consequences of forgetting that could paint a target as vivid as the red streaks on his car. Adam hesitated, his fingers tightening briefly around the steering wheel as he searched for the right words to mask the storm brewing inside him. "I just hate being stuck out there so far from you and Evan," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "It's tearing me apart. But I've got to admit, these people, they're not what I thought they'd be." The confession hung heavy in the air, tinged with reluctant surprise. He shifted uncomfortably, the phone pressed hard against his ear as he sat on the edge of his creaky motel bed, the thin mattress sagging beneath him. "What do you mean?" Lily's voice came through soft but curious, pulling him deeper into his thoughts. "Today," he began, quieter now, "I watched this entire neighborhood rally together. A family lost everything in a fire. Clothes, furniture, memories, gone. And people showed up with blankets, food, even toys for the kids. Then at the store, some guy just paid for an old woman's groceries. No hesitation, like it was nothing. It threw me off, Lily." His tone softened further, almost a whisper, as shame crept into his chest. "I've been wrong about a lot." Lily's response was warm, encouraging, a lifeline in the dim haze of his exile. "That's a good thing, Adam. Seeing the world through new eyes, it's tough being apart, I know, but maybe this is what you needed to grow." Her words stirred something in him, a flicker of hope battling the weight of his isolation. "Maybe," he admitted, running a hand through his messy hair, his gaze drifting to the cracked ceiling above. "But it's not all rosy out here. Someone keyed my car today, spray-painted it with threats, ugly stuff. Some folks still despise me." The bitterness seeped back in, sharp and familiar. Lily's reply was gentle but edged with truth. "Can you really blame them? After what went down with DeJohnson's daughters?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just steady, a reminder of the mess he'd made. Adam flopped back onto the bed, the springs groaning under his weight, and stared blankly upward. The peeling paint on the ceiling seemed to mock him, a jagged map of his mistakes. "I just want to come home," he muttered, his throat tight. 6 months'll fly by, Lily assured him, her tone softening like a balm. "Evan and I aren't going anywhere. We're right here waiting for you to come back better, stronger. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, hot and unbidden, and he blinked them away. I love you both so much, he choked out. We love you too, Lily whispered back, her voice a tender echo in the sterile room. Try to sleep, okay? The call ended, and Adam let the phone slip from his hand onto the threadbare blanket. The silence of his dingy apartment closed in, thick and oppressive, the faint hum of traffic outside barely piercing the loneliness. Yet the sound of Lily's voice lingered, a fragile thread of comfort weaving through his exhaustion. He shut his eyes, letting the weariness drag him under, her words replaying like a quiet lullaby as he drifted off. 6 months passed in a blur, a whirlwind of forced smiles and shallow pleasantries. Adam had learned to navigate his new world, a predominantly black precinct where he was the outsider, the one with a tarnished badge and a past that whispered behind his back. On the surface, he'd adapted. He nodded politely at his colleagues, cracked the occasional joke, even pitched in at community cookouts, flipping burgers under the watchful eyes of skeptical neighbors. But beneath the mask, his old prejudices festered, a dark current swirling in the depths of his mind. He couldn't shake the resentment, the belief that he didn't belong there, that this punishment was unjust. Officer King, a tall woman with a no-nonsense stare, gripped his hand firmly on his last day. I hope you've learned something here, Adam, she said, her dark eyes boring into his, searching for a crack in his polished facade. Oh, absolutely, he replied, flashing a grin that never reached his soul. It's been eye-opening. The lie slid off his tongue with practiced ease. The drive home felt like shedding shackles. With every mile, the tension in his shoulders melted, the familiar streets of his hometown rising like a beacon of freedom. He pulled into the driveway, tires crunching on gravel, and there they were, Lily and Evan, waiting on the porch. Evan, all boundless energy and wild hair, barreled down the steps, a blur of joy in his sneakers. Daddy! He shouted, launching himself into Adam's arms. Adam caught him, lifting him high before crushing him close, inhaling the clean, soapy scent of his son's shampoo, a smell that anchored him to everything he'd missed. Lily approached more slowly, her steps deliberate, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She wrapped her arms around them both, her touch warm and grounding. Welcome home, she murmured, her breath soft against his cheek. The reunion was a quiet symphony of relief and love, a moment he'd clung to in his darkest hours. That night, after Evan was tucked into bed, his small chest rising and falling under a superhero blanket, Adam sank into his worn leather armchair. A cold beer rested in his hand, the condensation dripping onto his jeans as he stared into the flickering glow of the living room lamp. Home felt like a sanctuary, its familiar creaks and shadows a stark contrast to the sterile motel room he'd endured. But the comfort only sharpened his anger, honing it into something dangerous. His thoughts twisted back to Maya and Nia Johnson, the twin sisters whose defiance during that traffic stop 6 months ago had sparked his downfall. He could still see their faces, calm, unyielding, staring him down as he'd barked orders, their father's influence a silent shield. Those girls, he growled under his breath, his fingers tightening around the bottle until his knuckles whitened. They think they're untouchable. Lily glanced up from her novel, her brow furrowing slightly. What was that? She asked, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. Nothing, he said too quickly, forcing a tight smile. But his mind was already racing, a plan taking shape like a storm gathering on the horizon. They needed to learn, needed to feel the weight of consequences, to understand that their privilege didn't make them invincible. A little lesson, he told himself, nothing too drastic, just enough to rattle them. He drained his beer and stood, kissing Lily's forehead with a casual, I'm heading to bed. But as he climbed the stairs, sleep was a distant thought. In the darkness of their bedroom, he lay awake, plotting his next move against the Johnson twins, the architects of his exile. The following evening, Adam sat hunched over his desktop, the blue glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his face. His fingers flew across the keyboard, tapping into the police database with the ease of years of training. Within minutes, he'd pulled up the files on Maya and Nia Johnson. Same grade as Evan, he noted with a bitter twist of his lips. He scrolled through their records, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the details. Honor roll, student council, community service awards. The list of their accomplishments stretched on, a testament to their golden lives, protected by their father's clout. It infuriated him. 6 months ripped from his family because of them, and here they were, thriving. His jaw clenched as he grabbed his keys and headed out, the night air cool against his flushed skin. At Walmart, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a harsh glare illuminating the aisles as he pushed a cart with purpose. He tossed in silly string, plastic wrap, super glue, stink bombs. Childish pranks, sure, but enough to send a message. Just a little lesson, he muttered, adding a pack of permanent markers to the pile. The cashier, a teenage girl with a bright smile, chirped, "Having a party?" Adam forced a chuckle. Something like that. He paid in cash, leaving no trace, and returned to his car, methodically sorting his haul. His police instincts kicked in. Precision, caution, nothing sloppy. He pulled up the school's website on his phone, scanning the events calendar. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. The winter formal was days away. Perfect. Those smug Johnson girls wouldn't see it coming. Driving home, his trunk loaded with supplies, Adam felt a rush of grim satisfaction. 6 months of biting his tongue, playing the reformed man. It was time to settle the score. He stashed the bags in the garage behind dusty boxes, out of Lily's sight, and slipped into bed beside her, his mind buzzing with anticipation. The next morning broke crisp and golden, sunlight spilling through the trees as a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Adam woke early, his stomach a knot of excitement and unease. He barely tasted his breakfast, cold toast and bitter coffee, before kissing Lily goodbye and ushering Evan to the car.
"Dad, why are we leaving so early?"
Evan asked, his voice sleepy but curious. Adam's grip tightened on the wheel, his smile thin. "Just want to beat the traffic, bud." But his eyes were already on the road ahead, fixed on the reckoning he'd set in motion. Justice, he told himself, was about balance, about making people face the fallout of their actions. But as he drove, a darker truth gnawed at him. Power, once abused, left scars that twisted into vengeance. The Johnson twins weren't just a target, they were a mirror, reflecting the man he'd become, and the one he refused to let go. The morning air hung heavy with a crisp chill as Evan rubbed his sleepy eyes, his small fingers clutching his beloved dinosaur lunchbox. The once vivid green plastic had dulled over the years, its edges smoothed by countless trips to school, a quiet testament to his attachment. "Why are we up so early, Dad?" he mumbled, his voice thick with the grogginess of a child not yet ready to face the day. Adam, gripping the steering wheel with knuckles whitening from tension, glanced at his son through the rearview mirror. "Just want to beat the traffic, buddy," he replied, forcing a casual tone that barely masked the storm brewing inside him. The suburban streets stretched out before them, silent and serene, lined with tidy rows of houses still cloaked in the pre-dawn darkness, their windows like unblinking eyes watching the world awaken. They pulled into the school parking lot 20 minutes before the first bell, the asphalt slick with morning dew that glistened faintly under the soft glow of streetlights, like a scattering of tiny, forgotten jewels. Adam guided Evan toward the entrance, where a handful of other early arrivals shuffled inside, their backpacks slung low and their steps heavy with lingering sleep. Normally, Adam would have driven off without a second thought, the hum of his engine fading into the distance as he returned to his routine. But not today. Instead, he maneuvered his car into a secluded corner of the lot, tucked behind a row of towering oak trees. Their gnarled branches twisted overhead, framing a perfect view of the student parking area. He sat there, engine off, the quiet pressing against his ears as his heart began to thud. A slow, deliberate rhythm that quickened with every passing second. Then he saw it. The silver Honda Civic belonging to the Johnson twins, its chrome trim catching the first rays of sunlight like a flare of defiance. The car rolled into the lot with an effortless glide, and out stepped Maya and Nia, their movements synchronized in a way only twins could manage. They wore matching blue sweaters that hugged their frames, the color popping vividly against their dark skin, and their worn backpacks hung casually over their shoulders. They strode toward the school entrance, heads held high, their braided hair swaying slightly with each step, two young women utterly oblivious to the shadow lurking nearby. Adam's breath hitched as he watched them disappear through the double doors. He counted to 60 under his breath, a habit ingrained from years of police surveillance, each number a tether to the control he fought to maintain. The lot remained mostly empty, save for a few teachers clutching steaming travel mugs, their shoes tapping a staccato rhythm against the pavement as they hurried inside. With a glance around to ensure no eyes lingered, Adam slipped out of his car. His movements were quick yet deliberate, a predator masking itself as prey. From his jacket pocket, he retrieved a small knife, one he'd plucked from his stash of prank supplies, its blade winking wickedly in the morning light. Crouching beside the driver's side tire, he hesitated, his hands trembling faintly as the cool air nipped at his skin. His breath puffed out in short, frantic bursts, forming fleeting clouds that dissolved into the stillness. Then, with a swift motion, the knife pierced the rubber, releasing a soft, sinister hiss that seemed to ripple through the quiet lot. He moved from tire to tire, methodical and relentless, watching as the rubber sagged beneath the car's weight, each puncture a silent cry of surrender. Next, he pulled a thick black marker from his pocket, uncapping it with fingers that now steadied under a surge of twisted conviction. He scrawled across the driver's side window the words, "Go back where you came from," spilling out in bold, jagged strokes. The marker squeaked against the glass, a grating sound that clawed at the silence like nails dragged across a chalkboard. His writing grew bolder, more frenzied, as he adorned the other windows with slurs and venomous phrases, each letter a lash of fury he could no longer contain. When he finished, a car door slammed somewhere in the distance, a sharp crack that jolted him back to reality. He pocketed the marker and walked away, his pace measured despite the sweat beading on his forehead, his police training keeping his stride smooth and unhurried, as if he were merely a man checking his own vehicle. Back in his car, Adam's chest heaved, his heart hammering against his ribcage like a beast clawing for freedom. He stared at the vandalized Honda from across the lot, unable to tear his eyes away. The black letters stood out starkly against the silver paint, impossible to ignore in the growing daylight, while the deflated tires left the car listing pathetically to one side, a wounded creature resigned to its fate. "That'll teach them," he muttered, his voice low and unsteady as he fumbled with the key, his shaking hands barely able to turn the ignition. As he drove away, he caught glimpses of students arriving, some already pointing at the wreckage and snapping photos with their phones, their expressions a mix of shock and revulsion. His grip tightened on the wheel, the tremor in his fingers betraying the dark satisfaction pooling in his chest. A heavy, suffocating weight that drowned out the faint whisper in his mind, warning him he'd gone too far. That afternoon, the Johnson twins emerged from the school, their voices hushed as they dissected their calculus test, oblivious to the scene awaiting them. Maya's laughter faded mid-sentence, and Nia's steps faltered as they rounded the corner to their parking spot. Their silver Honda sat there, broken and defiled, 4 flat tires and hateful words smeared across every window in thick, unforgiving marker. Maya's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and quiet horror, while Nia's fingers curled into fists, her knuckles straining against her skin as she fought to keep her composure. For a long moment, they stood frozen, the air between them thick with unspoken pain. The damage wasn't just to their car. It was an assault on their dignity, a jagged tear in the fabric of their everyday lives.
"We should call Dad,"
Nia said at last, her voice taut, each word clipped with the effort of holding back a tide of emotion. Maya shook her head, her braids swaying gently as she exhaled a shaky breath. "No, He's buried in that trafficking case. He's got enough weighing him down. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts with trembling fingers. I'll call Uncle Daniel. He'll know what to do about getting it towed. From his vantage point behind a hulking SUV several spaces away, Adam watched, his pulse quickening. He'd expected tears, screams, some raw display of vulnerability to validate his actions. Instead, he saw strength. Two young women facing cruelty with a grace that gnawed at his resolve. They made calls, snapped photos of the damage with steady hands, and waited for the tow truck, their calm efficiency a silent rebuke to his chaos. The twins' poise only stoked the embers of Adam's rage. In his warped mind, their composure was a challenge, a refusal to bend under the fear he'd meant to instill. His fingers dug into the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached, the pressure building behind his eyes. "This isn't enough," he growled under his breath, the words bitter and sharp as the tow truck rumbled into the lot. They need to learn their place. The twins stood shoulder to shoulder as their car was hoisted onto the flatbed, a subtle gesture of unity that twisted something ugly in Adam's gut. Other students approached them, offering rides and quiet words of support, their solidarity a glaring contrast to his isolation. It made his stomach churn, a nauseating blend of envy and contempt. When it was time to pick up Evan, Adam circled to the elementary school wing, his mind a whirlwind of dark possibilities. His son bounded into the car, his voice bright and bubbling with tales of his day and the science fair ahead, but Adam barely registered the words. His thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling through plans, each more vicious than the last, to shatter the Johnson twins' world. He needed something bigger, something that would carve a lasting scar, something they couldn't simply rise above. As he pulled into his driveway, Evan's chatter faded into a distant hum, drowned out by the relentless churn of his obsession. Justice, he told himself, was what drove him, but it was a hollow lie. What he sought was power, the thrill of bending others to his will, and the consequences of that hunger would ripple far beyond the parking lot. A lesson in retribution he'd yet to grasp. That evening, Evan shuffled down the dimly lit hallway of their modest home, his sneakers scuffing softly against the worn wooden floorboards. In his hands, he clutched a crumpled sheet of math homework, its edges frayed from nervous fidgeting. He needed his father's help to untangle the mess of equations that swam before his tired eyes. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of old books and the faint musk of pipe smoke that always lingered near his father's study. As he neared the door, left ajar just enough to cast a sliver of warm light onto the hallway wall, he heard it. A voice, low and seething, dripping with a venom he barely recognized as his father's. "Get some guys from the old neighborhood," Adam muttered, his words sharp like the edge of a blade. "Make it look like an accident. Those Johnson girls won't know what hit them." Evan stopped dead in his tracks, the worksheet slipping slightly in his sweat-dampened grip. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart thudded painfully against his ribcage. Maya and Nia Johnson. He knew them. Juniors at his school, their faces bright with kindness whenever they ran the peer mentoring program. They were the sort of people who made the world feel a little less heavy, a little less cruel. And now, his father's voice, twisted with rage, was weaving a plan to snuff out that light. Evan's mind reeled as the pieces clicked into place, each word a hammer striking his innocence. Adam's muttering grew darker, oblivious to the boy trembling just beyond the door. Maybe crash into their car. Teach them a real lesson this time. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against Evan's chest until he couldn't bear it any longer. With a surge of courage he didn't know he possessed, he shoved the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. "Dad, you can't!" His voice quivered, but it carried a resolve that surprised even him. Adam whirled around in his creaky leather chair, his face flushing a deep crimson as if the blood itself were ashamed to be caught in such a moment. "Evan, what? How long have you been standing there?" His tone was sharp, defensive, like a cornered animal snapping its jaws. "Long enough," Evan replied, his voice shaking but his stance firm. "You can't hurt Maya and Nia. They're good people. Adam's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as though he could grind his son's words to dust between his teeth. "You don't understand, son," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "While I was away for those 6 months, separated from you and your mom, it was because of them. They need to pay for what they put our family through." The words hung heavy, laced with a bitterness that Evan could almost taste. But Evan shook his head, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he fought back the tears threatening to spill. "No, Dad, you don't understand. Those girls, they helped me, helped you, even if you don't see it." Adam's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his stern features like a shadow passing over stone. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, leaning forward slightly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Evan's chest heaved as he drew a shaky breath, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He stepped closer, the worksheet now forgotten, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. "Remember when I told you about those 5th graders picking on me last month? I didn't tell you everything." Adam's anger softened, just a fraction, his eyes narrowing as he leaned back, waiting. "Go on," he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with something that might have been concern. "They were shoving me around behind the gym," Evan continued, his voice trembling with the memory, "trying to take my lunch money. I was scared, Dad, really scared. Then Maya and Nia saw it. They didn't just walk by like everyone else. They stepped in, stopped it. And they didn't stop there. They talked to those kids, got them to say sorry. Now those same boys, they're nice to me. They even sit with me at lunch sometimes." His voice broke, emotion spilling over as he met his father's gaze. "They didn't even know who I was, Dad. They helped me because it was right." Adam sank back into his chair, the fire in his eyes dimming as confusion and doubt crept in. He rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw, staring at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Evan's plea came softer now, raw and desperate. "Please, Dad," he said, swiping at his tears with the back of his hand. "I know you were gone for a long time, and it hurt. It hurt us too, but hurting them won't fix anything. It'll just make more pain." For a long moment, Adam said nothing, his gaze locked on Evan's tear-streaked face. Then something shifted, a subtle crack in the wall of resentment he'd built so carefully. I'll think about it, Evan," he said at last, swallowing hard. "Maybe you're right. Maybe there's been enough hurt already." Evan surged forward, wrapping his arms around his father in a fierce, trembling hug. Adam hesitated, then returned the embrace, his broad hands resting on his son's shaking shoulders. The tension that had coiled in his frame began to unravel, thread by thread. "Promise you'll at least think about letting it go," Evan whispered into his father's shirt. Adam's voice was rough but steady as he replied, "I promise, buddy. I'll consider it. I promise." The next morning broke with a crisp clarity, the sky a pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud. A gentle breeze stirred the golden autumn leaves, sending them spiraling lazily to the ground as Adam pulled his old pickup into the school drop-off zone. Evan gathered his backpack, the weight of their late-night conversation still lingering in the air between them. He cast his father a look, half hope, half plea, before sliding out of the truck and disappearing into the swarm of students. Adam watched him go, his hands still wrapped around the steering wheel, his mind a battlefield of warring thoughts. Evan's words about forgiveness echoed like a distant melody, clashing with the bitter refrain of vengeance he'd nursed for so long. He stayed parked, his eyes sweeping the lot with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent years behind a badge. Despite his promise, the old instincts clawed at him, tightening his shoulders with a familiar ache. Then he saw it, the Johnson twins' silver sedan, glinting in the soft morning light as it eased into its usual spot. Maya stepped out first, her braided hair catching the sun, followed by Nia, who adjusted her backpack with a quick, practiced motion. They laughed at something, their voices carrying faintly over the hum of idling engines, a sound so ordinary, so alive, that it twisted something deep in Adam's chest. Before he could process it, a dark van screeched into the lot, tires squealing against the asphalt as it lurched to a stop beside the girls. Adam's body went rigid, his cop instincts roaring to life as adrenaline flooded his veins. Two men in black ski masks burst from the vehicle, moving with a chilling precision that spoke of rehearsal and intent. The twins' laughter turned to gasps, then muffled screams as the attackers descended. One pressed a cloth to their faces, chloroform, Adam's mind supplied grimly, while the other shoved them into the van, their schoolbooks and pens scattering across the pavement like fallen leaves. The cries, brief and stifled, pierced the quiet morning, sending a shiver racing down Adam's spine. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles bleaching white. He wasn't on duty. No gun, no radio, no backup. The rational part of him screamed to call 911, but a deeper instinct gnawed at him. By the time help arrived, that van could vanish into the city's sprawl, taking Maya and Naya with it. The tires screeched again as the van peeled out, leaving black streaks on the ground. Adam's pulse hammered in his ears as he watched it tear around the corner. The same girls he'd cursed hours ago now swallowed by danger. Without a second thought, he slammed his truck into gear and pulled out after them, his decision forged in an instant of clarity. He kept his distance, 3 car lengths back, his eyes locked on the van's taillights as it wove through morning traffic. His phone sat silent on the passenger seat, but he couldn't risk a glance to dial. Not when a single misstep could mean losing them. The van darted down side streets, threading through the city's labyrinth of forgotten roads and industrial sprawl. Adam's training took over, his mind cataloging every turn. Elm Street, past the old warehouse, a sharp right onto Madison. His palms sweated against the wheel, his mouth dry as dust, but years on the force kept his focus razor sharp. Through the windshield, the van's tinted windows loomed like a void, hiding the terror he knew was unfolding inside. The irony hit him like a punch. He was chasing down the very people he'd wished harm upon, the ones he'd blamed for his unraveling life. Now their fate rested in his hands, a stark lesson in justice staring him down. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he grabbed his phone, one eye still on the van as it swerved around a delivery truck. He punched the speed dial for D.A. Johnson's office, his heart thundering against his ribs. The line rang 3 times, each second an eternity, before a voice answered, tight with authority. D.A. Johnson speaking. Adam's words came fast, clipped with urgency. Sir, this is Officer Adam Connors. Your daughters, they've been kidnapped outside their school. I'm tailing the van now. A sharp gasp crackled through the line, followed by a tremor in the DA's usually steady tone. What? Where are you? East on Madison, nearing the industrial district, Adam replied, swerving to keep the van in sight. Black van, tinted windows, plate starts with XRK. His voice held steady, but inside he was a storm. Fear, guilt, and a desperate need to right a wrong he'd almost committed himself. The call crackled with the DA's ragged breathing, but Adam's focus never wavered. The van barreled ahead, carrying its captives deeper into the shadows, and he followed, a man reborn in the crucible of consequence, chasing redemption through the city's unforgiving streets. The chase was relentless, the van slicing through the desolate streets like a hunted animal desperate to evade capture. Adam Connors gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening as he shadowed the vehicle, keeping just far enough back to avoid suspicion. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, adrenaline surging through him as he muttered into his radio, "They're moving fast, but I've got them in sight, alerting all units now." His voice trembled with a mix of determination and dread, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. On the other end of the line, District Attorney Johnson snapped into action, his tone shifting from weary exhaustion to the clipped urgency of a man who'd spent years commanding chaos. "Stay on them, Connors. Don't you dare lose that van." Adam could hear the storm brewing in the background, phones shrilling, voices barking orders, the entire precinct erupting into a frenzy. Johnson was pulling every string he had, mobilizing every officer within reach to swarm the industrial district. The stakes were personal for him, and Adam felt that truth gnawing at his gut. Johnson's twin daughters, Maya and Nia, were inside that van, stolen away by faceless predators, and Adam was their lifeline. Peering through his windshield, Adam tracked the van as it veered onto Warehouse Row, a crumbling maze of abandoned factories and shadowed alleys. The street stretched out like a graveyard of forgotten industry, rusted metal gates creaking in the wind, broken windows staring blankly at the unfolding drama. It was the kind of place where secrets went to die, a perfect hideout for those who thrived in the dark. Adam's jaw tightened as he relayed the update. They're turning onto Warehouse Row. It's quiet out here, too quiet. They could vanish if we don't move fast. We've got units converging on your position, Johnson shot back, his voice crackling through the static. Cars are blocking every exit from the district. Whatever you do, don't let them slip away. Adam nodded to himself, his eyes narrowing as the van suddenly lurched forward, tires squealing as if the driver had glimpsed a threat in the rearview mirror. Instinctively, Adam pressed harder on the gas, the engine roaring beneath him as he fought to maintain his discreet tail. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the chase, but from the unspoken burden he carried, a secret that twisted his insides with every passing second. "Sir," Adam said, lowering his voice as if the words might shatter under scrutiny, "I know I'm the last guy you'd want near your daughters right now, but I swear to you I'll do everything in my power to bring them back safe." The line went silent for a heartbeat, a heavy pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then Johnson responded, his voice thick with a tangle of terror and reluctant trust. "Just get my girls home, Connors. That's all I care about right now." The rawness in his tone pierced Adam, a stark reminder of the stakes, and of the hypocrisy festering within himself. The air began to hum with the distant wail of sirens, a chorus of justice closing in. Ahead, flashes of red and blue danced off the grimy warehouse walls, signaling the trap snapping shut. "They're about to hit the roadblock on Mason Street," Adam reported, watching as the van's brake lights flared crimson in panic. "They've seen the units. They're turning back." The van whipped into a sharp U-turn, rubber scorching the pavement, and Adam yanked his wheel hard to avoid a collision as it barreled past him. His pulse thundered in his ears as he spun his car around, resuming the pursuit with grim resolve. "They're heading toward Carter Avenue now. They're boxed in," Johnson replied, his voice taut with controlled fury. "Units behind, units ahead. We've got them cornered." The sirens grew deafening, a symphony of retribution as police cars swarmed from every direction, their lights painting the scene in a kaleidoscope of authority. Adam's chest tightened, his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized the end was near. He clung to a fragile hope that the twins were still alive, unharmed within the belly of that black beast. "All units in position!" Johnson's voice cut through the radio, sharp and steady, despite the storm raging within him. "We're moving in!" The scene erupted into controlled chaos. Police vehicles screeched to a halt, encircling the van in a ring of steel. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn, their shouts slicing through the tension as they formed a human barricade. "Come out with your hands up!" bellowed an officer through a megaphone, his command reverberating off the concrete jungle surrounding them. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity, each tick of the clock a dagger in Adam's chest. Then, slowly, the van's doors creaked open. Two figures emerged, their hands raised in surrender, faces pale and drawn under the glare of flashing lights. Officers descended like hawks, forcing them to the ground, cuffs snapping shut with a metallic clang. Adam held his breath as others rushed to the rear of the van, prying open the doors. There, huddled together in the dim interior, were Maya and Nia, shaken, wide-eyed, but alive. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, though it was tainted by the bitter aftertaste of his own guilt. Tires shrieked again as Johnson's car roared onto the scene, skidding to a stop before the engine had even settled. The DA leapt out, his suit rumpled, his face a mask of anguish and desperation as he sprinted toward his daughters. Officers gently guided the twins out, their small frames trembling as they stumbled into the open air. Johnson dropped to his knees, enveloping them in his arms, his broad shoulders shaking as he clutched them close. "My girls," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of his relief.
"Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "We're fine, Dad," Maya managed, her voice quavering but resolute, a thread of strength holding her together. Nia pressed herself tighter against her father, her breath hitching as she murmured, "Just scared." Johnson's gaze lifted, searching the crowd until it landed on Adam, who stood off to the side, an outsider in his own victory. The DA's expression softened, gratitude replacing the hard edges of fear as he rose and approached. "Adam," Johnson said, extending a hand, his voice warm with appreciation. "Thank you. If you hadn't been there." Adam took the handshake, his grip unsteady as emotion clogged his throat. "Just doing my job, sir," he muttered, the words tasting like ash. Johnson shook his head firmly. "No, this was more than that. You've changed these past months, overcome your biases, started seeing people for who they are. That's real growth." Adam shifted on his feet, the praise searing into him like a brand. His mind flashed to the night before, the slashed tires on the twins' car, the venomous messages he'd scrawled in a fit of rage, the darker plans he'd been nursing in secret. Johnson's gratitude was a poison he didn't deserve, a cruel mirror reflecting the monster he'd become. "It's nothing," he mumbled, unable to meet the DA's eyes, his gaze dropping to the cracked pavement beneath him. The twins stood close to their father, their expressions a mix of relief and wary curiosity as they glanced at Adam. They didn't know, couldn't know, that the man who'd saved them had also been their tormentor, the source of the fear that had shadowed their recent days. "We should get the girls home," Johnson said, wrapping an arm around each of them, his protective instincts kicking in. "They've been through hell today." Adam nodded mutely, watching as the family walked away, officers buzzing around them to wrap up the scene, cuffing the kidnappers, collecting statements, restoring order to the madness. "Take care," Johnson called over his shoulder, his voice fading into the clamor. Adam lingered, the weight of his actions crashing down on him like a collapsing building. The irony was suffocating. He'd saved the very people he'd been plotting to destroy, and now their thanks echoed in his ears like a mocking chorus. He turned away, his steps heavy as he trudged back to his car, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the desolate street. Later that afternoon, Adam sat at his desk in the precinct, the hum of routine paperwork a dull roar in his ears. His phone buzzed, the screen flashing the school's number, and his stomach dropped. Daytime calls from school were a harbinger of trouble. "Officer Connors speaking," he answered, his voice tight with unease. "Mr. Connors, this is Principal Martinez," came the reply, clipped and serious. "There's been an incident with your son. He's being taken to Memorial Hospital now." Adam's hand clenched around the phone, dread coiling in his chest. "What happened? Is he okay?" His mind raced, conjuring images of blood and broken bones. "He was in a scuffle with some older students," the principal explained. "The paramedics are being cautious, but you need to get to the hospital right away." Adam barely registered grabbing his keys and jacket, the drive a blur of red lights and blaring horns as his imagination spun wild, catastrophic scenarios. He burst through the emergency room doors, spotting his wife, Lily, in the waiting area. Her face was ashen, streaks of mascara trailing down her cheeks like dark rivers. "Lily!" He rushed to her, grasping her hands as panic clawed at him. "How is he? What happened?" She squeezed his fingers, her voice trembling as she spoke. "He's being checked now, Adam. You won't believe this. Some high school boys were harassing him by the basketball courts. They shoved him, and he tripped backward toward the concrete steps. But one of the Johnson girls, she saw it happen. She ran over and grabbed him just before his head hit the ground." Adam's world tilted, the air vanishing from his lungs. "The Johnson girls? Maya or Nia?" Lily nodded, fresh tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes, one of them. I don't know which. She saved him, Adam." The revelation struck him like a thunderbolt, a cruel twist of fate that bound him tighter to the family he'd wronged.
His knees weakened as he sank into a chair, the lesson of justice and consequence crashing over him. Power, when abused, left scars that rippled far beyond intent. And now, redemption stood before him in the form of the very girls he'd sought to harm. In the midst of a chaotic afternoon, the piercing wail of an ambulance siren still echoed faintly in Adam Connor's ears as he slumped heavily into a stiff hospital chair. His leg, trembling beneath him, gave way as though it could no longer bear the weight of his guilt. Just hours before, his son Evan had narrowly escaped disaster, tumbling backward down a set of unforgiving concrete steps at school. The image haunted Adam. The sharp edges, the dizzying drop, the fragility of his boy's small frame. But what gnawed at him most wasn't just the near tragedy itself. It was who had stepped in to stop it. Maya Johnson, one of the twin daughters of Day Johnson, a man Adam had vilified in his mind for months, had acted without a second thought. She'd hurled herself into the fray, taking the brunt of the fall to shield Evan's head from smashing against the stone. Bruised and scraped, she'd risen from the ground, her only concern ensuring Evan was safe. This was the same girl Adam had targeted with venomous hatred, her family's car defaced with his scrawled insults, their peace disrupted by his petty schemes. Now, the bitter irony of it all churned in his gut like a sickness he couldn't shake. Principal Martinez burst through the hospital doors not long after, her brisk stride cutting through the sterile haze of the waiting room. She'd tailed the ambulance from school, her face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Approaching Adam and his wife Lily, she lowered herself into a chair across from them, her dark eyes steady but warm with concern. "Mr. and Mrs. Connor," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority softened by genuine care, "I wanted to see how Evan's doing and fill you in on what happened." She leaned forward slightly, hands clasped tightly as if steadying herself. "If Maya Johnson hadn't reacted so fast, your son could have been seriously hurt. Those steps are solid concrete, unyielding, and he was falling backward, completely off balance." She didn't hesitate, even when it meant getting knocked down herself. Martinez shook her head, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. "I've already suspended the boys who started the fight, but I need you to understand how lucky we are that Maya was there. She's the reason this didn't end worse." Adam's stomach twisted violently, a wave of nausea rising as her words sank in. Every venomous thought he'd harbored about the Johnson family, every cruel act he'd committed against them, came crashing down like a house of cards in a storm. He'd painted them as enemies, fueled by baseless prejudice, their dark skin enough to ignite his irrational fury. He'd scratched hateful words into the paint of their car under the cover of night, plotted ways to make their lives miserable. All while they, in turn, showed nothing but grace. Maya, barely more than a teenager, had proven herself braver and more honorable than he'd ever been in his years as a police officer. The realization clawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. "Is Maya okay?" he croaked, his voice rough and ragged, as if dragged over gravel. Martinez nodded. "She's got some scrapes and bruises from the fall, but she waved off the medics. All she cared about was making sure Evan was all right." Adam pressed his hands to his face, fingers digging into his skin as shame and gratitude warred within him. The weight of his actions pressed down like a lead blanket, suffocating him with the truth. He'd been a monster plotting against a hero. Later, after Evan was discharged, Adam lingered outside the hospital room, his breath fogging the glass window as he peered inside. There sat Da Johnson, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a quiet strength that filled the space, alongside his twin daughters, Maya and Nia. Evan, awake now, chattered animatedly despite the bandages wrapping his arm, his small voice a stark contrast to the heaviness in Adam's chest. The sight squeezed his heart tight, gratitude for his son's safety tangled with the bitter sting of his own disgrace. Steeling himself, he pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken tension as every pair of eyes turned to him. De Johnson's eyebrows arched in surprise, his guarded expression betraying a flicker of curiosity. The twins, poised and composed, watched him with calm, unreadable gazes that somehow cut deeper than any accusation could.
I hope I'm not interrupting, Adam stammered, his voice faltering in a way it never had on duty. I wanted to talk to you all. Johnson rose to his feet, his posture firm but not hostile, a man who'd weathered storms and stood tall through them. Officer Connor, he said evenly, waiting. Adam's eyes darted to the twins, settling on Maya. A small bandage clung to her elbow, a quiet testament to her sacrifice. I heard what you did for my son, he said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't suppress. I had to thank you myself. But more than that, I need to tell you I was wrong, so wrong about everything. His hands shook as he spoke, the tremor betraying the turmoil within. I let hate take over me. I targeted you, harassed you, planned worse, all because of your skin. I was blind, stupid, and cruel. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them, but they said nothing, their steady expressions masking whatever they felt. Johnson's gaze bore into him, a mix of disappointment and cautious interest playing across his weathered face. Adam turned to Maya, his voice breaking as he continued. When Evan told me how you saved him, it broke me open. While I was scheming against you, you were risking yourself for my boy. You showed more guts, more heart, than I've ever had in my whole damn career. Tears brimmed in his eyes, spilling over as he pressed on. I'm not just sorry, I'm ashamed. Ashamed of the hate I carried. Ashamed of the example I set for my son. Ashamed of how I twisted my badge into a weapon against you. Johnson leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate, each word measured like a judge's gavel. Officer Connor, what are you hoping to get out of this apology? Adam swallowed hard, the truth a jagged lump in his throat. Nothing, sir, he said, raw and honest. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know I see it now. How wrong I was. Your daughter's kindness showed me what a failure I've been. Silence hung heavy for a moment, thick with the weight of his confession, until Maya's soft voice cut through it. We knew about the car, you know. The slashed tires, the messages. Adam's face burned, shame searing his skin. I know, and Naya interjected, her tone steady. We didn't report it. We hoped you'd find a better path on your own. Johnson cleared his throat, his eyes never leaving Adam's. Change isn't about words, Officer Connor. It's about what you do. This apology, it sounds real. But trust you've broken doesn't come back with a speech. It's earned, step by step, through actions that prove you mean it. Adam nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. I get that, sir. I want to be better. For Evan, for this town, for myself. It won't happen fast, but I'll put in the work. I have to. The twins shared another look, a quiet understanding passing between them, before Maya spoke again, her voice firm yet gentle. We accept your apology, Officer Connor. Adam's breath hitched, a whisper escaping him. Thank you. For everything. Days later, Adam's patrol radio crackled to life, shattering the monotony of his afternoon shift. On the other end was Miss Foster, her voice quaking with a fear that stripped away her usual warmth. Officer Connor, please. My grandson Jaden hasn't come home since last night. Adam's mind flashed to the sweet-faced grandmother who'd always greeted him with a glass of iced tea during his rounds, her porch a haven of kindness in a rough neighborhood. Jaden, her 17-year-old grandson, was a bright kid teetering on a razor's edge, torn between a future of books and the pull of the streets. When did you last see him? Adam asked, already swinging his patrol car around. Yesterday, after school, she replied, her voice cracking. He said he was headed to the library, but some boys have been after him lately. A bad crowd. I'm terrified, Officer Connor. Adam's gut clenched. He knew that crowd. Kids he'd once profiled and harassed, driven by the same prejudice he was now fighting to unlearn. I'll find him, Miss Foster, I promise. For hours, Adam scoured the neighborhood, his boots pounding pavement as he checked Jaden's usual haunts.
The basketball court, the corner store, the park bench where he'd sketch for hours. He flashed the boy's photo to friends and shopkeepers, each shake of their heads fueling his resolve. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, a tip from a grizzled store owner led him to an abandoned warehouse on the town's edge. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its shattered windows staring blankly into the gathering dark. Inside, Adam's flashlight beam caught Jaden, curled tight in a corner, knees hugged to his chest. The teen flinched, wide-eyed and trembling. "Jaden," Adam said softly, lowering the light. "Your grandma's worried sick." Jaden's voice shook. "They're after me. The Kings. They said I have to join or else—" Adam crouched beside him, keeping his tone steady. "Nobody's touching you, Jaden. We can keep this off the books if you want. Let's get you home." Jaden looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, and for the first time, Adam felt the weight of justice, not as a weapon, but as a shield. In that moment, the lesson burned clear. Power abused breeds ruin, but power wielded with care can mend what's broken. Maya's courage had saved his son and cracked open his heart. Now, Jaden's fear gave him a chance to prove he could change. The road ahead was long, but Adam knew the cost of faltering, and the quiet strength of those who'd shown him mercy when he deserved none. The tears streaked down Jaden's face, leaving glistening trails that caught the faint glow of the streetlights outside the patrol car. His voice trembled as he whispered, You won't arrest me, will you?" Adam, seated beside him, felt a pang of something unfamiliar twist in his chest. He shook his head slowly, his tone softening like a breeze smoothing over jagged rocks. "No, Jaden, right now I just want to help you." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, and for a moment the world outside the car, the blaring sirens, the distant shouts, faded into a muted hum. Jaden hesitated, his breath hitching as he stared at his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Then, gradually, the dam broke. He began to speak, his voice low and halting at first, as if testing the waters of trust. He painted a vivid picture of his life, the relentless pressure to join the gang that ruled his block, their promises of belonging laced with threats he couldn't ignore. The quiet, fragile dream of college that flickered in his mind like a candle in a storm, and the crushing weight of expectations pulling him in opposite directions, his family's hopes clashing with the street's demands. Adam listened, truly listened, his eyes tracing the boy's features. Where he might once have seen a potential threat, a statistic waiting to happen, he now saw a terrified kid, lost in a maze of a world that offered no clear exits. Jaden's dark eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and Adam felt an ache deep in his core, a recognition, a connection. "You know," Adam said after a long pause, his voice gentle as he leaned forward slightly, "my son's about your age, loves science just like you." Jaden blinked, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve, a faint spark of curiosity breaking through his despair. "Yeah? What's he want to be?" Adam smiled, a small, wistful curve of his lips. "A doctor. Just like you, he's got big dreams." That simple exchange opened a floodgate. They talked for nearly an hour, the car parked in the shadows of a quiet street, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Jaden's breathing steadied, his shoulders loosening as the tension drained from his frame. Adam saw echoes of his own son, Evan, in this boy, the same restless ambition, the same quiet fears, just dressed in a different story, shaped by a harsher hand. When they finally pulled up to Miss Foster's house, the porch light cast a warm, golden glow across the cracked wooden steps. The front door flew open, and Miss Foster, a wiry woman with silver-streaked hair and hands weathered by years of hard work, rushed out. She enveloped Jaden in a fierce embrace, her thin arms trembling as she pulled him close. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, carving paths through the lines of a face that had seen too much loss.
"Thank you, Officer Connors,"
she sobbed, her voice breaking as she reached out to clutch Adam's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for bringing my baby home." Her gratitude was raw, unfiltered, and it pierced Adam like a blade. As he watched the grandmother and grandson cling to each other, their silhouettes framed against the soft light spilling from the house, something shifted inside him. The rigid labels he'd once clung to, criminal, delinquent, troublemaker, crumbled like dry leaves underfoot, replaced by a deeper understanding, a thread of empathy weaving through his thoughts. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, and offering a hand instead of a fist. Weeks later, the local diner buzzed with the hum of evening life. Adam and Jaden sat across from each other in a worn booth, the red vinyl seats creaking as Jaden leaned forward, his eyes alight with excitement. The air was thick with the scent of fresh coffee brewing behind the counter and the sizzle of burgers on the grill, mingling with the clatter of silverware and the murmur of conversations swirling around them. Jaden sketched furiously on a napkin, his pencil moving in quick, precise strokes as he explained his latest science project. "So if we adjust the solar panel's angle just right," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm, "we could boost efficiency by at least 20%. And I've been thinking, what if we added a tracking system to follow the sun? It'd be a game changer." Adam nodded, genuinely impressed, a swell of pride rising in his chest. Over the past few weeks, their bond had deepened into something substantial, a mentorship that filled a hollow space in Adam's life he hadn't even known was there. He'd spent hours helping Jaden with college applications, poring over essays late into the night, and watching with quiet joy as the young man's confidence bloomed like a flower breaking through concrete. The bell above the diner's door chimed sharply, cutting through the cozy atmosphere, and Adam's stomach tightened. He recognized the swagger before he even saw the face. Officer James Garrett, his former partner, strode in, his uniform pristine, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights like a symbol of unyielding authority. Garrett's sharp eyes swept the room, his lip curling slightly as he took in the diverse crowd, families laughing, teenagers joking, workers unwinding after long shifts. His presence felt like a storm cloud rolling over a sunny day. "Well, well," Garrett drawled, sauntering toward their booth with deliberate slowness, his boots clicking against the linoleum floor. "If it isn't Adam Connors, hardly recognized you without your patrol car." His gaze flicked to Jaden, a dismissive glance that barely registered the boy's existence. "Doing some community outreach, Connors." Adam straightened, his shoulders squaring instinctively as he met Garrett's sneer. "This is Jaden," he said, his voice steady and firm. "He's heading to college next fall. Engineering. Kid's got a brilliant mind for science." Jaden shifted beside him, his hands curling into fists beneath the table, crumpling the napkin with its careful drawings. Garrett's smirk widened, his tone dripping with condescension. "Is that right? Quite the change from your old approach, Adam. Remember how we used to handle these neighborhoods? The good old days, keeping things in line." The words were a jab, a reminder of the man Adam used to be, quick to judge, heavy-handed, blind to the humanity beneath the surface. "Things change, Garrett," Adam replied, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "People change. These are good people, every single one of them, and they deserve our respect." Garrett snorted, adjusting his belt with a casual arrogance. "Respect? Come on, Adam, don't tell me you've gone soft. What happened to the guy who knew how to keep order? The one who understood what really matters out there?" Adam rose to his feet slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes locking onto Garrett's with unwavering resolve. "That guy was wrong," he said, each word weighted with conviction. "He was prejudiced, afraid. These people aren't the enemy, they're our community. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one who needs to change." Garrett's face flushed with anger, his jaw clenching so tightly the muscles twitched. "You're unbelievable," he scoffed, his voice rising. 6 months in this dump and suddenly you're their champion? What happened to having each other's backs, to the brotherhood?" Adam's expression softened, but his voice remained steady, clear as a bell. "I've got the community's back now, Garrett, and I'm prouder of that than I ever was of anything we did together." Garrett's eyes narrowed, his fists balling at his sides. "Good luck with your new friends," he spat. "Just remember who your real allies are." He turned on his heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind him with a force that rattled the blinds and sent a hush rippling through the diner. Adam sank back into the booth, the adrenaline draining from his body, leaving him both exhausted and strangely liberated. The chatter of the diner resumed, a comforting hum that washed over him like a tide. When he looked up, Jaden was watching him, his dark eyes thoughtful, a quiet respect glowing within them. "That was your old partner?" Jaden asked, his voice soft as he smoothed out the crumpled napkin, tracing the lines of his sketch with a tentative finger. Adam nodded, running a hand through his graying hair, the weight of his past settling on his shoulders. "Yeah, that was the old me, too. Not anymore, though. Sometimes the hardest part of changing is facing who you used to be and letting it go." Jaden held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, a small, grateful smile breaking through. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for standing up to him, for being different." They sat in a comfortable silence, the ceiling fan whirring overhead, dishes clattering faintly from the kitchen. Adam knew he'd just torched a bridge to his past, but as he looked at Jaden, at the trust and hope shining in the young man's eyes, he felt no regret, only certainty. This was justice, not the cold, unyielding kind he'd once enforced, but a living, breathing thing, built on connection and second chances. The consequences of abusing power, he realized, weren't just external. They festered within, hollowing out the soul until nothing real remained. As they stepped out into the cool evening, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky, Adam felt lighter than he had in years. The faint hum of crickets filled the air, and their footsteps fell into an easy rhythm, synchronized like a shared pulse. "Will I see you at the community cleanup tomorrow?" Jaden asked, glancing sideways with a hopeful grin. Adam smiled back, warmth spreading through him. "Wouldn't miss it." Driving home that night, the road stretching out beneath the glow of his headlights, Adam couldn't shake the seedling of hope taking root in his chest. For years he'd built walls, stone by stone, fear by fear, thinking they'd protect him. Now, with every new bond, every act of kindness, those walls were falling, replaced by something unbreakable. Community. When he walked through his front door, Evan was waiting, sprawled across the couch with a book in his lap, his bright eyes snapping up to meet his father's. "Dad?" he exclaimed, scrambling to sit up. "Miss Foster called. She wants to know if you can help at the senior center tomorrow for bingo night." Adam chuckled, ruffling Evan's hair as he sank onto the couch beside him. "Guess I'm pretty popular around here now, huh?" Evan grinned, his face lighting up. "Yeah, but only 'cause you're helping people." Adam's heart swelled, and he pulled his son into a tight hug, gratitude washing over him. "Thanks, buddy," he murmured, "for reminding me what really matters." 6 months ago, he'd been a man consumed by anger, his life a fortress of resentment. Now, as he held his son close and thought of Jaden, Miss Foster, and the community he'd once turned his back on, Adam knew he'd found something worth fighting for, a justice rooted in love, and a legacy worth leaving behind. As dusk settled over the tranquil suburban street, the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences in a soft golden hue. The air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine, a peaceful stillness interrupted only by the rhythmic tap of old Mr. Jefferson's cane against the pavement. A retired history teacher and cherished grandfather, he strolled along with a quiet dignity, his pressed slacks and button-up shirt paired with a tweed cap that had become his signature. Humming a tune from his youth, he savored the crisp evening breeze brushing against his weathered face, until the harsh screech of tires shattered the calm. A police cruiser lurched to a stop beside him, its headlights casting stark shadows across the sidewalk. Out stepped Officer Brandon, a man whose broad frame strained against his uniform, as though the fabric itself struggled to contain his inflated sense of self. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Mr. Jefferson, narrowing with suspicion, while a faint, unsettling smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. "Hey, you!" he barked, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" His hand hovered near the holstered gun at his hip, fingers twitching with eager anticipation. Mr. Jefferson paused, his cane stilling mid-tap. Confusion flickered in his chest, but he kept his composure, his voice steady as he replied, "Just taking a walk, officer. Is there a problem?" The words were polite, measured, a lifetime of patience woven into their cadence. But Brandon's smirk vanished, replaced by a sneer that twisted his features into something colder, uglier. "Yeah, there's a problem," he snapped. "Trespassers like you loitering where you don't belong." His tone dripped with contempt, each syllable a deliberate jab. A pang of sorrow tightened Mr. Jefferson's chest, sinking like a stone into the pit of his stomach. Yet his expression remained unshaken. "Officer," he said calmly, "I live just 3 houses down. I've been in this neighborhood for 30 years. The truth hung in the air, simple and undeniable, but Brandon's eyes glinted with disinterest. He wasn't here for explanations. His hand slid closer to his gun, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now." Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Jefferson complied. His cane slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground with a hollow thud that echoed in the stillness. His joints ached as he raised his hands, the weight of age and indignity pressing down on him. "Easy there, officer," he said, his voice unwavering despite the humiliation creeping up his spine. "There's no need for the gun. I'm just a man out for his evening walk." But Brandon's posture remained rigid, his hand now resting firmly on the weapon, his tone sharp and venomous. "Don't give me that. I've seen your type before, always trying to act like you belong, trespassing, casing houses, probably up to something shady. You don't fool me." The accusation stung like a slap, but Mr. Jefferson didn't flinch. He lifted his gaze to meet Brandon's, his dark eyes steady and resolute. "You think you know me," he said softly, "but you don't. All you see is the color of my skin." Brandon snorted, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he leaned in closer. "Don't pull the race card on me, old man. I call it like I see it, and right now I see a perp who needs to be taught a lesson." He grabbed his radio with a flourish, muttering into it for backup, his voice laced with smug authority. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather along the edges of the scene, their whispers buzzing like static in the air. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the unfolding drama, while others stood frozen, their faces etched with disbelief. Mr. Jefferson let out a deep, weary sigh, the sound heavy with decades of buried pain. He'd faced moments like this before. Harsh words, suspicious glares, the sting of being judged for nothing more than existing. He'd hoped those days were behind him, that time had softened the world's edges. Yet here he stood, a black grandfather branded a criminal on the very street he'd called home for 30 years. "Officer," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you're making a mistake." Brandon's smirk returned, wider this time, as he reveled in his power. "We'll see about that. Hands behind your back, now." As he reached for his cuffs, Mr. Jefferson shook his head ever so slightly. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Brandon scoffed, his laugh a harsh bark. "Yeah, you're a guy about to spend the night in a cell. That's who you are." But Mr. Jefferson's expression didn't waver. If anything, a faint, knowing smile began to curve his lips, a quiet hint of something deeper, a secret strength he hadn't yet revealed. The crowd pressed closer, the tension thickening until it felt like the air itself might snap. Brandon yanked out his handcuffs, the metallic clink of the chain ringing out like a warning bell. Mr. Jefferson stood still, his weathered hands now resting behind his back, his dignity intact despite the officer's aggression. Brandon's irritation flared. How dare this old man remain so composed? As he reached for Mr. Jefferson's wrist, the older man spoke again, his voice low but resonant with authority. "Before you put those cuffs on me, you should probably call your superior." Brandon chuckled darkly, the sound dripping with disdain. "Oh, I don't think so. I'm the law here, old man. You don't get to make demands." But Mr. Jefferson turned his head just enough to meet Brandon's gaze, and there was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. "Call your superior," he repeated. "Trust me on this." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Brandon hesitate, if only for a fleeting moment. His ego, however, wouldn't let him back down. With a mocking laugh, he snapped one cuff around Mr. Jefferson's wrist. "You think you're special? Let me guess. You're gonna call some lawyer buddy, cry about unlawful detention?" He secured the second cuff with a flourish, taunting as he worked. Mr. Jefferson said nothing, standing tall despite the cold metal biting into his skin. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, voices rising in protest. "Hey, you can't do that!" someone shouted, their phone held high to record every second. Others joined in, their outrage swelling into a chorus of defiance. Brandon's smirk faltered, but he doubled down, his grip tightening on Mr. Jefferson's arm. Meanwhile, miles away, Adam Connors tucked his son Evan into bed, the soft glow of a nightlight illuminating the boy's peaceful face. The day had been long, but Adam's heart felt lighter than it had in years. As he smoothed the blanket over Evan's small frame, his mind wandered to the people he'd met in the community, the neighbors who'd once eyed him warily, the teenagers who'd darted across the street to avoid him, the families who'd watched from a distance, waiting to see if his change of heart was genuine. He thought of Maya and Niara, two women whose strength and kindness had pierced through the walls he'd built around himself. They'd endured his past arrogance, his cold detachment, and yet they'd shown him a better way, a path of compassion he hadn't known he needed. The next morning, Adam rose with a renewed sense of purpose, the dawn light filtering through his curtains in soft, golden streaks. He slipped into his police uniform, the fabric settling over his shoulders with a weight that felt different now. Not just the burden of authority, but a mantle of responsibility. The badge pinned to his chest gleamed faintly, a symbol no longer of power but of service. He drove to the community cleanup, where volunteers were already hard at work, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Weeds were yanked from the earth, graffiti vanished under fresh coats of paint, and litter disappeared from the sidewalks, each small act a stitch in the fabric of renewal. Jaden, a wiry young man with a quick smile and a mop of unruly curls, spotted Adam and waved him over. "Hey, Officer Connors, glad you made it." He handed Adam a pair of gloves and a trash bag, his grin infectious. As they worked side by side, sweat beading on their brows, Adam felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a sense of belonging he'd never known. People greeted him with genuine warmth, their voices carrying no trace of the suspicion he'd once faced. Children darted past, their laughter ringing out as they chased one another, their smiles bright and unguarded. Older residents, leaning on porches or perched on lawn chairs, offered nods of approval, their eyes crinkling with quiet pride. For the first time, Adam wasn't just an officer patrolling their streets. He was one of them, a thread woven into the tapestry of their lives. As the day drew to a close, the volunteers gathered for a group photo, their faces flushed with exertion and hope. Adam stood among them, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He saw resilience in the way they stood shoulder to shoulder, unity in their shared purpose, and a quiet strength that had been waiting for him to recognize it. This was a community that had given him a second chance, a family he hadn't realized he'd longed for. When he returned home that evening, Lily was waiting, her smile soft and radiant. She pulled him into a tight embrace, her arms a haven of strength and warmth he'd missed more than he could express. "You look different," she said, pulling back to study his face, her voice gentle but certain. Adam's throat tightened with emotion. "I feel different," he admitted, his words raw and honest. "I think I've finally found my place, Lily, not just as a cop, but as part of something bigger than myself." That night, as he lay in bed, Adam's thoughts drifted to the future. Challenges loomed on the horizon, difficult conversations, misunderstandings, moments of doubt. but he was ready to face them, no longer a solitary figure against the tide. He was part of something greater now, buoyed by a community that believed in him. As sleep claimed him, a quiet peace settled over his soul, a confidence that he was finally walking the right path, one of compassion, understanding, and true service. Back on that suburban street, the standoff between Mr. Jefferson and Officer Brandon teetered on the edge of chaos. The crowd's protests grew louder, their phones a constellation of tiny lights capturing the injustice unfolding before them. Brandon's bravado wavered, his hand still gripping Mr. Jefferson's arm, when a second cruiser rolled up, its siren silent but its presence commanding. Out stepped Captain Reynolds, a seasoned officer with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. His sharp gaze took in the scene, Brandon's aggressive stance, Mr. Jefferson's calm resilience, the restless crowd, and his jaw tightened. "Brandon," he said, his voice low but cutting through the noise like a whip. "What the hell is going on here?" Brandon straightened, his smirk returning as he gestured toward Mr. Jefferson. "Caught this guy trespassing, Captain. Suspicious behavior, loitering. Thought I'd bring him in." Reynolds' eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his gaze shifting to Mr. Jefferson. Recognition flickered in his expression, followed by a flash of disbelief. "Release him," Reynolds ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Brandon hesitated, his ego bristling, but the captain's stare bore into him. "Now!" With a grunt of frustration, Brandon unlocked the cuffs, the metal clanking as it fell away. Mr. Jefferson rubbed his wrists, his dignity unshaken, and bent slowly to retrieve his cane. The crowd erupted in cheers, their relief palpable, but Reynolds wasn't finished. "Brandon, this is Mr. Jefferson," he said, his voice steady but laced with reprimand. "He's lived here longer than you've been alive. He's the man who taught me history in high school, the one who organized half the community projects you've been too busy strutting around to notice. You owe him an apology, and you're damn lucky he's not pressing charges." Brandon's face flushed red, his bravado crumbling under the weight of his mistake. He muttered a half-hearted sorry, but Mr. Jefferson only nodded, his small smile returning, not out of forgiveness but out of a quiet triumph. As the crowd dispersed, Captain Reynolds clapped a hand on Mr. Jefferson's shoulder. "You all right, sir?" he asked, his tone softening. Mr. Jefferson chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "I've seen worse, son, but I'll keep walking this street every evening. Someone's got to remind folks what justice looks like." Reynolds grinned, tipping his head in respect, and Mr. Jefferson continued his stroll, his cane tapping a steady rhythm into the night. For Adam, redemption was a slow burn, a choice forged day by day through small, deliberate acts. For Mr. Jefferson, it was a stand taken in quiet defiance, a lesson in dignity that rippled outward. And for Brandon, the bitter taste of consequence lingered, a stark reminder that power, when wielded without care, could crumble under the weight of its own hubris. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed from above. It was a garden cultivated by those brave enough to tend it, a truth Adam and Mr. Jefferson now carried forward, step by resolute step. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk where chaos had erupted. A young woman's voice pierced the air, sharp with outrage. "You can't treat him like that!" she yelled, her hands clenched into fists as she stood rooted to the pavement, her eyes blazing with disbelief. Nearby, another voice chimed in, rougher but equally indignant. "He was just walking. What the hell is wrong with you?" The words ricocheted off the brick walls lining the quiet street, but they barely registered with Brandon. The rookie cop stood tall, his chest puffed out, his grip tight on the arm of the elderly man he'd just shoved into cuffs. To him, this was about control, maintaining the polished image of authority he'd spent months cultivating. The jeers from the growing crowd were nothing more than background noise, easily ignored. But that fragile confidence, built on quick assumptions and unchecked power, was about to collide with a force he couldn't dodge. A sleek black SUV rolled up, its tinted windows glinting ominously in the fading light. It came to a stop with an eerie grace, the engine's low hum cutting through the clamor like a whispered command. The driver's door swung open, and a figure stepped out, tall, imposing, dressed in a navy suit so crisp it seemed to defy the humidity. The badge on his belt caught the sun's last rays, flashing like a warning. Chief Alexander Jefferson, the city's top cop, had arrived. The crowd inhaled collectively, a ripple of recognition spreading through them. Whispers buzzed like static. "That's him. Jefferson." Brandon's smug mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. His spine stiffened, and he threw up a shaky salute, a desperate attempt to cling to protocol. "Chief Jefferson, sir, I wasn't expecting—" The chief's glare stopped him cold. It was a look so piercing it could have turned molten steel to ice, a silent rebuke that carried more weight than any shouted order. When he spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, each word slicing through the thick tension like a blade. "Officer Brandon, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Brandon blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Sir?" The chief took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement, his gaze unyielding. He lifted a hand and pointed toward the man in cuffs, gray-haired, stooped slightly, but standing with a quiet dignity that belied the metal biting into his wrists. "That man you just restrained," Chief Jefferson said, his tone dropping to a dangerous calm, "is my father." The crowd exploded into gasps and murmurs, a wave of shock rolling through them. Brandon's face went ashen, the color draining from his cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug. His eyes darted wildly between the chief and Mr. Jefferson, his mouth flapping open and shut, words failing him entirely. He looked like a man who'd just stepped off a cliff without realizing it. But the chief wasn't finished, not even close. His voice deepened, a quiet thunder that demanded every ear in the vicinity. "Officer Brandon, uncuff him, now!" Brandon's hands trembled as he fumbled with the keys, the metallic jangle echoing in the stillness. The cuffs hit the ground with a dull clatter, and Mr. Jefferson flexed his wrists, his face a mask of composure despite the red marks left behind. "Sir, I didn't know," Brandon stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, his voice cracking under the strain. "I thought he was—" "You thought he was what?" Chief Jefferson cut in, his tone sharpening like a honed edge. "A threat? A criminal? Or maybe you just assumed a black man walking down the street couldn't possibly belong here?" The crowd fell silent, the weight of the accusation hanging heavy in the air. Some lowered their phones, sensing the moment had transcended petty viral fame. Others kept recording, their lenses trained on Brandon as his bravado crumbled. He shifted on his feet, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too hot. "Sir, I was just following protocol," he mumbled, grasping at excuses like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "He was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" The chief's eyebrows arched, his voice laced with incredulity. He turned to his father, gesturing toward the cane lying forgotten on the ground. "Dad, were you being suspicious?" Mr. Jefferson bent slowly, his movements deliberate, and retrieved the cane. He straightened up, leaning on it lightly, and offered a faint shrug. "Unless humming Ella Fitzgerald counts as a felony these days, I'd say no." A nervous chuckle rippled through the onlookers, but the chief's expression remained stone cold. He pivoted back to Brandon, his voice hardening into steel. "Let me make this crystal clear. My father has lived in this neighborhood longer than you've been breathing. He's a retired teacher, a pillar of this community, and above all, a human being who deserves respect, something you clearly forgot exists. You, on the other hand, just threw an innocent man in cuffs because you couldn't see past your own prejudice." Brandon's mouth twitched, but no sound came out. "Sir, I didn't mean—" he started, but the chief advanced, closing the gap between them. "You didn't mean it? That's your defense? You drew your weapon on an unarmed elderly man with a cane. You radioed for backup over a guy taking his evening stroll. You humiliated him in front of his neighbors, all because you decided he didn't fit your narrow little picture of who belongs here." The authority Brandon had wielded so carelessly moments ago evaporated, leaving him exposed, shrinking under the chief's unrelenting stare. Do you know what's worse than what you did, Officer Brandon? The chief continued, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. It's that you don't even grasp how wrong it was. But trust me, you're about to learn. The words landed like a gavel, and Brandon's face twisted with a mix of fear and uncertainty. The chief turned to the crowd, his broad shoulders squared, his presence commanding their full attention. Thank you all for witnessing this, he said, his tone softening but still resolute. I promise you, this won't be swept under the rug. He gestured toward his father, who stood tall despite the ordeal, his quiet strength a stark contrast to Brandon's unraveling. To everyone here, remember this. No one, no matter their age, their skin, or how they move through the world, should be treated as less than human. Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd, some nodding solemnly, others offering quiet applause. Then the chief's eyes locked back on Brandon, who looked like a condemned man awaiting his fate. Get back to your cruiser, he ordered, his voice firm and final. We're going to have a very long talk at the station, and I do mean long. Brandon nodded meekly, his shoulders slumping as he scurried to his patrol car, the crowd parting like the Red Sea to let him pass. His engine sputtered to life, and he drove off, tail lights fading into the dusk, a defeated figure slinking away from the reckoning he'd brought upon himself. As the onlookers began to disperse, their voices a mix of support and righteous anger, Mr. Jefferson turned to his son. His expression was calm, but a flicker of concern danced in his eyes. Alex, he said softly, his voice steady as ever. You didn't have to come all the way out here for this. I could have handled it. Chief Jefferson sighed, resting a hand on his father's shoulder, the weight of the gesture heavy with unspoken care. Dad, I know you could have. You've been dealing with guys like him your whole life, standing tall through worse than this, but you shouldn't have to anymore. Not if I can help it. For a moment they stood there, the silence between them thick with shared history, years of resilience, quiet battles, and hard-won pride. Mr. Jefferson nodded slowly, his gaze softening. I appreciate it, son. But you know this isn't just about me, don't you? The chief's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I do. Brandon's not just one bad apple. He's a symptom of something rotten I've got to root out in my department. It's on me to fix this. Mr. Jefferson studied his son, pride gleaming in his weathered eyes. You've always faced things head-on, Alex. Just be careful. Plenty of folks won't like you stirring the pot. A wry smile tugged at the chief's lips. Since when has that ever stopped me? The old man chuckled, shaking his head. Never has. Just don't let it wear you down. Their exchange was interrupted by a young woman stepping forward from the thinning crowd. Her phone trembled slightly in her grip, but her chin was high, her resolve firm. Excuse me, Chief Jefferson, she said, her voice wavering before steadying. The chief turned, his stern demeanor softening. Yes, ma'am? She took a breath, then plunged ahead. I just wanted to thank you for standing up for your dad, for saying what you did. A lot of us see stuff like this happen all the time, and we feel helpless. I got it all on video, and if you need it, for evidence or anything, I'm here. The chief raised a hand, a faint smile breaking through. I appreciate that, truly. Hold on to it for now. I'd rather handle this inside the department first. But knowing the community's watching, keeping us accountable, that's a force I don't take lightly. She nodded, relief washing over her face. Well, just know we've got your back, both of you. She glanced at Mr. Jefferson, who tipped his cap with a warm, much obliged, young lady. As she melted back into the crowd, the chief turned to his father. You ready to head home? Mr. Jefferson shook his head, tapping his cane against the pavement with a soft thud. Not yet. I'm finishing my walk. Need to clear my mind. The chief raised an eyebrow. Want me to come along? Nah, the old man said, a faint grin tugging at his lips. I've been walking these streets since before you were born. One punk with a badge isn't going to make me scared of my own home. The chief watched as his father set off, his steps slow but resolute, the cane's rhythm a quiet anthem of defiance. For a fleeting second he hesitated, then let a rare, genuine smile slip through. Mr. Jefferson had been roughed up, humiliated, but his spirit? Untouchable. And in that unshakable dignity, the chief found the fire to keep fighting. A fight for justice that was grueling, often thankless, but undeniably worth every step. The evening air cooled as Mr. Jefferson continued down the block, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of streetlights. Neighbors who'd seen the drama unfold now greeted him warmly. "Evening, Mr. J," called a woman from her porch, her voice rich with affection. A kid on a bike screeched to a stop, his small face creased with worry. "Hi, Mr. Jefferson. You okay?" The old man paused, his smile gentle. "I'm fine, young man. Just out enjoying the night." The boy nodded, reassured, and pedaled off, his wheels humming against the asphalt. It was a tiny moment, but it stitched itself into Mr. Jefferson's heart, a reminder that for every Brandon, there were a dozen souls who saw him, knew him, valued him. Meanwhile, back at the station, Chief Jefferson was gearing up for the showdown he'd promised. Brandon sat in a cramped conference room, his uniform rumpled, his earlier swagger replaced by a fidgety unease. Across the table, the chief loomed, his silence more intimidating than any raised voice. "You know why you're here, Officer Brandon?" he began, his tone icy and exact. Brandon nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." The chief leaned forward just enough to make the space feel smaller. "No, I don't think you do. You're here because what you did today doesn't just reflect on you. It stains this whole department. And I won't stand for it." Brandon squirmed, his eyes darting to the floor, but there was no escape from the lesson barreling toward him, a lesson about justice, about the cost of wielding power without thought, and about the consequences that come when arrogance blinds you to the humanity in front of you. The chief settled back, his mind already mapping out the reforms he'd push for, determined to build a force where bias and brutality had no foothold. The road would be long, but he was ready. Ready to walk it with the same unyielding resolve his father had shown, step by deliberate step. In the dim glow of the precinct's conference room, Officer Brandon sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly on the chipped wooden table. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as Chief Jefferson's voice sliced through the tension. "Chair, sir, I made a mistake. I thought—" Brandon stammered, his words crumbling under the weight of his superior's interruption. The chief's tone rose, sharp and commanding, like a storm breaking over calm waters. "You thought? You thought it was acceptable to draw your weapon on an unarmed elderly man strolling through his own neighborhood? You thought pinning his wrists in cuffs with no shred of evidence was somehow in line with protocol? Tell me, Officer Brandon, what exactly was going through your mind?" Brandon's throat tightened, his mouth opening but no sound escaping. Shame burned across his face, painting his cheeks a deep crimson as his eyes dropped to the table. He could feel the sting of his own regret, a bitter taste that lingered as he replayed the moment in his head. The elderly man's startled gasp, the tremor in his weathered hands, the way the quiet street had seemed to hold its breath. The chief leaned forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the room. His voice softened, but the words grew heavier, sinking into Brandon like stones. "Do you realize what's worse than what you did today? It's not just about you, Brandon. It's about a system, a flawed, creaking machine that hands badges to people like you without hammering home the gravity of what that badge means. A system I'm tasked with fixing." Brandon swallowed hard, the lump in his throat nearly choking him. "I didn't mean for it to escalate like that," he muttered, his voice barely audible, a fragile thread of desperation woven through it. The chief's gaze sharpened, cutting through the excuse like a blade. "But it did," he snapped, his words ringing with finality. "And because it did, there will be consequences. Effective immediately, you're suspended without pay. A full investigation is pending, and if you ever hope to pin that badge back on your chest, you'll complete mandatory bias training. No exceptions. Brandon's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face as the reality crashed down. "Sir, please, no!" he pleaded, his voice cracking, but the chief raised a hand, silencing him with the unyielding authority of a man who'd seen too much to bend. "This isn't up for debate," Jefferson said, his tone as firm as the steel in his spine. "What you did out there, it's the kind of behavior that chips away at the trust people have in us. If you can't grasp how serious that is, you don't belong here, or in any department." The room fell into a heavy silence, the chief's words hanging like a storm cloud, dark and undeniable. Brandon slumped in his chair, the bravado he'd worn like armor stripped away, leaving him small and exposed. Chief Jefferson stood, his towering frame filling the space with an aura of resolve. "You can go now," he said, his voice steady but laced with expectation. "And while you're at it, think long and hard about what it means to serve and protect every single person in this community, not just the ones you deem worthy." Brandon rose slowly, his movements stiff, as if the weight of the moment pressed down on his very bones. "Yes, sir," he mumbled, the words barely a whisper as he shuffled toward the door, his head bowed. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the chief alone in the stillness. Jefferson exhaled deeply, the anger simmering just beneath his composed exterior threatening to spill over. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the frustration clawing at his chest. This wasn't about him. Not really. It was about the promise he'd made to himself years ago, and to his father just hours earlier after the old man had recounted the incident with a quiet strength that belied the humiliation he'd endured. Jefferson crossed the room to his office, his steps deliberate, and sat at his desk. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before diving into a memo. Mandatory training for all officers, a top-to-bottom review of procedures, a public statement owning the day's failure. He wouldn't let this fester in the shadows. He'd face it head-on, just as he'd vowed. Out on the streets, the evening air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. Mr. Jefferson, tall, silver-haired, and unbowed, continued his walk, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the sidewalk. The neighborhood hummed with life, children's laughter echoing from a nearby yard, the soft clatter of dishes from an open window, the warm nods of neighbors who knew him not just as a man, but as a pillar. Each smile, each murmured, "Evening, Mr. J." bolstered him, feeding the quiet dignity that had carried him through decades of storms. Some whispered, some roared. Today had been a tempest, but he walked through it as he always had, head high, eyes forward. As he neared his home, the porch light cast a golden glow across the twilight, a beacon in the fading day. He paused at the steps, his mind drifting back to the afternoon. The officers barked commands, the cold metal against his wrists, the way the world had seemed to tilt for a moment. But anger didn't grip him. Determination did. A retired teacher, he'd spent his life confronting ignorance, shaping young minds with patience and resolve. This, too, was teachable, a lesson in justice, in accountability, in the slow, stubborn march toward change. Before he could reach for the doorknob, it swung open, and there stood Maya, his granddaughter, her wide eyes brimming with worry and love. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. He chuckled, the sound low and warm, and patted her back with a gentle hand. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little unexpected excitement on my walk." She pulled back, her brow furrowing as she studied his face. "Excitement? I saw the video online. It's everywhere." "People are furious at that cop." Mr. Jefferson shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Let them be. Sometimes folks need to witness the raw truth to feel what others live through. But anger's just noise if it doesn't spark action." Maya tilted her head, her youthful curiosity alight. "What kind of action?" she pressed. He leaned on his cane, his voice steady and sure. "Education, for starters. Holding people accountable, always. And compassion. Never forget compassion. We've got to show the way even when the path's rough." Her eyes sparkled with admiration, her mind already spinning. "Maybe we could do something. like a community meeting. Talk about what happened. Figure out how to make things better. He beamed at her, pride swelling in his chest. Now you're thinking like a leader, Maya. Inside, the family gathered around the dinner table, the clink of plates and the murmur of voices weaving a tapestry of resilience. They spoke of the day's weight, the sting of prejudice, the exhaustion of proving their worth in a world that too often doubted it, but also of hope, of the chance to teach, to advocate, to nudge the system toward something better. Meanwhile, across town at the station, Chief Jefferson hunched over his desk, his pen scratching out the final lines of his memo. It was blunt, unflinching, a call not just to address one officer's failure, but to root out the rot in the whole department. He wouldn't settle for a slap on the wrist. This was about building something stronger, something worthy of the badge. When he finally trudged home, weary but unbroken, he found his father awake, cradling a steaming mug of tea in his favorite armchair. "Long day, huh?" Mr. Jefferson said, his smile knowing, his eyes glinting with the wisdom of years. The chief sank into the seat across from him, loosening his tie. "You could say that, but it's not the end, just the start." His father raised his cup in a playful salute. "That's the spirit. Justice isn't a straight road, Alex, but it's one worth traveling." The chief nodded, his respect for the old man deepening. "You're right, as always." Mr. Jefferson leaned back, his gaze distant yet warm. "I've seen a lot in my time. Ugliness, yes, but beauty, too. People can rise, son. You've got a shot now. To lift yourself, your department, this city. Don't let it slip." "I won't," the chief vowed, and the promise settled into his bones. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the neighborhood, painting the streets in hues of gold. Life stirred anew. Neighbors waved with a quiet solidarity, their greetings carrying a fresh undercurrent of purpose. The Jefferson porch became a gathering spot, a place where voices mingled, sharing stories, fears, and dreams. Change wouldn't come fast, it never did, but it had begun, sparked not by rage or fists, but by the enduring strength of a grandfather who refused to be diminished. Cane in hand, Mr. Jefferson stepped onto the sidewalk once more. This time he didn't just walk, he led, a quiet force carving a path toward something better, one determined step at a time.